Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. The abandoned mall stretched before me, its towering glass windows cracked and clouded with dust. The entrance doors hung open, swaying slightly with the wind, inviting me into its hollowed-out remains. Faded advertisements for sales long past still clung to the walls, their colors drained by time. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and something stale, almost like old perfume. My footsteps echoed as I made my way through the main corridor, passing empty storefronts and shattered display cases. Most of the stores had been gutted, their shelves stripped bare, their mannequins toppled over or missing limbs. A few broken escalators stood frozen in time, leading to nowhere. The only sound was the faint rustling of debris skittering across the tiled floor. Then, up ahead, I saw something strange. A store stood untouched, its glass doors unbroken, its interior pristine. Bright overhead lights illuminated the space, casting a sterile glow over the neatly arranged racks of clothing. It was as if it had never been abandoned at all. I stepped closer, pressing my hand against the glass, half expecting the image to waver like a mirage. But it was real. My breath fogged up the surface as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The mannequins in the window were eerily lifelike, their skin too detailed, their eyes too glassy. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the scent of new fabric and faint traces of cologne filling my lungs. The register sat clean and waiting, as if a cashier might return at any moment. My fingers trailed over a row of folded shirts, their texture crisp and untouched by dust. It was impossible nothing in the rest of the mall had been this well preserved. Then I noticed the mannequins. There were more of them than I had first thought, standing in perfect formation along the walls. Each one dressed in pristine outfits, their arms positioned naturally at their sides. But there was something wrong about them. Their faces weren't plastic, they had pores. Their eyelashes weren't painted, they cast shadows. My breath hitched as I took a step back, suddenly aware of how silent the store had become. The figures stood eerily still, their eyes fixed directly on me. The weight of their collective gaze pressed down on my chest, cold and unrelenting. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, to breathe, to convince myself I was imagining things. Then one of them blinked. A sharp gasp escaped me as I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a clothing rack. My heart pounded as I watched the figure, waiting for it to move again. But it didn't. It stood frozen, just like the others, its face expressionless, its arms limp. But I knew what I had seen. The silence grew heavier, stretching unnaturally as I turned toward the exit. I needed to get out now. My steps were careful, deliberate, as I tried to convince myself I wasn't being watched. But I could feel dozens of unseen eyes tracking my every movement. Then, just as I reached the door, a voice whispered from somewhere within the store. "Stay." Why? My entire body locked up as cold terror shot through my veins. The voice had been soft, almost pleading, but I knew it hadn't come from me. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the mannequins in my peripheral vision. They had moved. Some had shifted their stance, their heads tilted at odd angles. One was closer than before, much closer. Its fingers were curled slightly, as if caught mid-motion. I bit the inside of my cheek, forcing my legs to keep moving. The lights flickered. A rustling sound filled the air, like fabric shifting against skin. I ran. I burst through the doors, my breath ragged, my legs burning as I sprinted into the mall's empty corridors. The store remained perfectly still behind me, its mannequins frozen once more. But I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. My footsteps echoed as I darted past broken storefronts, my mind racing. I needed to find an exit fast. The front doors were too far, but the emergency exit near the food court might still be accessible. My lungs burned as I pushed myself forward. Then I heard it. A rhythmic clicking sound like heels against tile, slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. I forced myself to glance over my shoulder. My stomach dropped. The mannequins were following me. No longer stiff and lifeless, they moved, their limbs fluid and disturbingly human. Their faces remained eerily blank, but their eyes were locked onto me. Panic surged through me as I sprinted faster, weaving around toppled chairs and broken glass. The emergency exit loomed ahead, its rusted handle just within reach. I lunged forward, yanking it open with every ounce of strength. A wave of humid night air rushed in as I stumbled outside, my body shaking. I turned, expecting to see the mannequins spilling out behind me, but the doorway was empty. The mall stood silent, its broken windows reflecting the moonlight. My chest heaved as I took a few shaky steps backward, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Had the darkness played tricks on me? Then I saw them. Through the store's glass window, the mannequins stood exactly where I had left them. But something was different. They were no longer facing forward, no longer posed like displays. They were all turned toward the entrance, toward me. And in the very front, standing motionless by the door, was one I hadn't seen before. Dressed in my exact outfit, its hands resting at its sides, its face expressionless but unmistakably mine. Story 2. The factory loomed ahead, its skeletal remains barely holding together after years of neglect. Rusted beams jutted out like broken bones, and shattered windows revealed only darkness within. The air smelled of damp concrete and decay, the kind of place long forgotten by time. My footsteps crunched against the gravel as I stepped closer, drawn by an unshakable curiosity. Pushing open the heavy metal door, I was met with a wave of stale air that reeked of rust and mildew. The massive space stretched before me, filled with rusted machinery and conveyor belts frozen in time. Dust coated every surface, undisturbed for what looked like decades. Yet, despite the stillness, a strange sensation prickled at the back of my neck, as if I had just stepped into a place that was not entirely abandoned. Moving deeper inside, I swept my flashlight across the cavernous interior. Jagged beams of light cut through the darkness, revealing peeling paint and corroded pipes lining the walls. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere unseen. Then, in the middle of the vast emptiness, something stood out. A single wooden desk sat in the center of the room, completely out of place. It was clean, free of dust, as if someone had just been sitting there moments ago. A single chair was tucked beneath it, but what made my breath hitch was the sight of fresh tire tracks imprinted in the dust around it. Someone or something had been here recently. I stepped closer, my heart pounding against my ribs. The tracks curved sharply, leading away from the chair and vanishing into the surrounding dust-covered floor. Kneeling down, I traced a finger along the grooves, feeling the crisp edges where the weight had pressed into the ground. The realization sent a shiver up my spine. Whoever had left them had done so just moments before I arrived. Scanning the area, I saw no footprints, no other signs of life. Just the chair, the desk, and the silent, empty factory stretching in every direction. The flashlight beam trembled in my grip as I examined the desk, expecting to find some kind of clue. There were papers scattered across the surface, but they were blank, as if someone had placed them there for no reason. I pulled open the single drawer, half expecting to find something inside. Instead, there was only a single key resting in the center. It was smooth, polished, and entirely dust-free, standing in stark contrast to the rusted decay around me. I picked it up, feeling its cool weight in my palm, my mind racing with questions. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a faint, mechanical whirring sound from somewhere above. My breath caught as I turned my gaze upward. The rafters were a tangled mess of metal beams and forgotten machinery, but something had shifted. I could hear it, the unmistakable sound of movement in a place that should have been lifeless. The tire tracks, the desk, the key. It all felt deliberate, as if I had stepped into the middle of something I wasn't meant to see. I shoved the key into my pocket and backed away from the desk, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The whirring grew louder, a low hum vibrating through the air, sending adrenaline surging through my veins. A metallic clang echoed from the far end of the factory, followed by the sound of something scraping against the floor. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the building settling. Something was here. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs felt like lead, my body frozen in the weight of uncertainty. Then, the desk moved. Not by much, just an inch, just enough to make the wooden legs scrape against the concrete. My stomach clenched as I stared, waiting, barely breathing. The air around me had changed, thick with an unexplainable pressure, as if the factory itself had become aware of my presence. The sound of wheels rolling echoed from behind me. My pulse hammered as I spun around, but there was nothing. Just empty space, the shadows stretching impossibly long against the floor. But I had heard it. The same sound that must have come from the tracks around the chair. Someone or something had just moved. The whirring stopped. Silence crashed down, heavy and expectant. I took a slow step backward, then another, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The key in my pocket suddenly felt like a burden, like something I shouldn't have taken. My fingers itched to drop it, to leave it behind, but I couldn't bring myself to let go. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise started again, but this time it was closer. A faint whisper of movement, something shifting in the shadows beyond my reach. I could feel it now, the undeniable presence of something unseen watching me. My breath came in short, shallow bursts as I turned toward the door. I forced my legs to move, each step a battle against the unseen force pressing in around me. The factory seemed to stretch endlessly, the exit farther than I remembered. Behind me, the soft hum of movement followed, like wheels gliding over the concrete. I didn't dare look back. Reaching the door, I yanked it open, stumbling into the open air. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sound stopped. The factory stood behind me, dark and still, as if nothing had happened. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I turned back, half expecting to see something staring at me from within, but there was nothing. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the key. It felt heavier now, like it had absorbed something from that place. I didn't know what it belonged to or why it had been left for me to find. But deep down, I knew the factory wasn't finished with me. As I walked away, I swore I heard the sound of wheels rolling in the distance, following, waiting. Story 3. The abandoned church stood alone at the edge of town, its steeple leaning slightly as if weighed down by time. Ivy crawled up the stone walls, wrapping around the stained glass windows that had long since cracked. The wooden doors, weathered and warped, groaned as I pushed them open. Dust swirled in the faint light that streamed through the broken roof, illuminating the empty pews and ghostly shafts. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and something faintly metallic. Silence pressed in around me, broken only by the distant sound of wind slipping through unseen cracks. The altar stood untouched, covered in a layer of dust, its candles melted down to unrecognizable stumps. A grand wooden cross still hung on the wall, though the figure upon it had long since crumbled away. I walked cautiously down the aisle, my footsteps muffled by the dust-laden carpet. The pulpit loomed ahead, draped in a tattered cloth that swayed gently despite the stillness of the air. My eyes landed on a book resting on the altar, its leather cover cracked with age. Something about it drew me in, an odd feeling settling in my chest as I stepped closer. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the book's worn surface. A strange chill crawled up my arm, and for a moment, the room felt impossibly vast, stretching beyond its physical limits. Ignoring the unease creeping into my bones, I flipped the book open, sending a small puff of dust into the air. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with lines of delicate script. Then I saw it, my name. My breath hitched as I traced the ink, the letters unmistakable. It was written in a careful, old-fashioned hand, standing out starkly against the faded pages. The page was marked with a thin ribbon, as if someone had been waiting for me to find it. My gaze drifted downward, and my pulse stuttered as I read the date. Tomorrow's date. A sudden gust of wind slammed the church doors shut behind me, the sound echoing through the empty space. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I turned sharply, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but there was no one. Only dust and silence, stretching endlessly around me. I swallowed hard and turned back to the book, flipping through the pages in search of an explanation. The entries were filled with prayers, written in the same careful script, each one dated like a journal. Some pages were smudged, as if touched by trembling hands. Others had faded ink, words barely legible. Then I reached the last written page. The words sent a chill through me, their meaning unclear but undeniably ominous. Prepare the way. The faithful will be called. The name is known, and the hour is near. My fingers tightened around the edge of the book, the old leather creaking under my grip. A strange sensation washed over me, like I was being watched from the unseen corners of the church. The candle beside the altar flickered, though there was no breeze. My eyes darted to the pews, scanning the empty rows for movement. A shadow stretched across the far wall, shifting slightly, though nothing had moved. The air grew heavier, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. A whisper echoed through the rafters, too faint to make out the words. My breathing grew shallow as I turned in slow circles, searching for the source. The stained glass windows cast fractured colors across the floor, creating the illusion of shifting figures. My hands trembled as I closed the book, pressing it to my chest as if that could shield me. Then a sound. A soft, deliberate creak came from the balcony above. My head snapped up, eyes locking onto the darkened loft where the choir once stood. The railing was broken in places, the wood splintered and rotting. I strained to see past the shadows, but the light didn't reach that far. Another creak, followed by the unmistakable sound of a footstep. The air turned ice cold as I backed away, gripping the book so tightly my knuckles ached. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. The pulpit cast a long, sharp shadow as the light shifted, bending in ways that didn't make sense. I forced myself to turn toward the doors, ready to run. Then the organ played a single, trembling note. My body went rigid, every muscle locking in place. The sound reverberated through the empty church, the air vibrating with its weight. Dust drifted down from the rafters, caught in the dim glow of the broken windows. My pulse thundered in my ears as I took another step toward the doors. The book in my hands grew warm, almost burning against my palms. I gasped and dropped it, the sound of its impact unnaturally loud. The pages fluttered open as if caught in an unseen wind, stopping on the one with my name. My stomach lurched as I saw something new at time written beneath the date. 11:59 p.m. A deep sense of wrongness settled over me, a certainty that whatever this was, it wasn't finished. The organ groaned again, another low, vibrating note filling the space. I turned and bolted, my footsteps hammering against the wooden floor. The church seemed to stretch, the doors further than they had been before. The whispers followed me, growing louder, overlapping voices chanting words I couldn't understand. The stained glass warped as I passed, the images shifting figures turning their heads, hollow eyes watching. My lungs burned as I finally reached the doors, slamming my shoulder against them. They burst open, and I stumbled onto the church steps, gasping for air. The night was unnervingly still, the town distant beyond the trees. I turned back once, just for a second. The doors remained open, revealing only darkness inside. The organ had fallen silent, but the whispering still lingered in my ears. I ran, leaving the church behind, but the feeling never left me. Even as I locked myself in my apartment, the book's words burned in my mind. The date, my name, the time. As midnight approached, I sat awake, the silence pressing in. Then, as the clock struck 11:59 p.m., a soft creak echoed from the hallway outside my door. Story 4. The mansion loomed over me, its windows dark and empty like watching eyes. Vines crawled up the stone walls, wrapping around crumbling balconies and shattered glass. The front door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze with a low creak. The air was thick with the scent of rotting wood and damp earth, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for decades. I stepped inside, my footsteps muffled by a layer of dust and fallen debris. The grand foyer stretched out before me, its once elegant chandelier hanging lopsided, coated in cobwebs. Faded wallpaper peeled away in long strips, revealing the skeletal remains of the walls beneath. The staircase curled upward into the shadows, but I stayed on the ground floor, drawn by the eerie silence pressing against my ears. The parlor was filled with remnants of a forgotten time: an overturned chair, a piano missing half its keys, a fireplace choked with ashes long undisturbed. A large, gilded mirror above the mantel reflected the room in fractured shards. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed by my presence, spiraling in the dim light filtering through broken shutters. I wandered further, my fingers trailing along surfaces coated in years of neglect. The dining room still held its table, though the chairs were missing, their absence leaving an unnatural emptiness. A chandelier above was missing half its crystals, the remaining ones swaying slightly though there was no breeze. The air here felt heavier, as if something unseen lingered, watching from the edges of the room. A narrow hallway led deeper into the house, its walls lined with faded portraits. The faces in the paintings were solemn, their eyes following me as I walked past. Some of the frames were cracked, glass missing, leaving the figures exposed to the decay around them. I quickened my pace, unease curling in my stomach as I reached a door at the end of the hall. The study was small, its wooden desk covered in a thick layer of dust. Papers were scattered across it, their ink smudged and unreadable. A single drawer sat slightly open, its brass handle tarnished with age. I hesitated before pulling it fully open, the old wood groaning in protest as I peered inside. Photographs filled the drawer, stacks of them neatly arranged despite the disarray of the room. I picked up a handful, flipping through them with growing unease. They were all of strangers, their expressions neutral, their poses rigid, as if they had been instructed to stand still. Some were faded, others crisp, as though they had been taken only recently. I sifted through them, my hands trembling slightly as I reached the bottom of the pile. Then I froze. One photograph stood out from the rest, its edges slightly curled, its image sharper than the others. It was a picture of a dimly lit room, a cracked mirror reflecting its emptiness. But in the far corner, barely visible in the shadows, stood a figure. I leaned closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. The figure was me. I recognized the jacket I was wearing, the way my hands were shoved into my pockets. The image sent a cold wave of dread through me. I had never been in this room before, but the photograph said otherwise. I dropped the stack, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The pictures scattered across the desk, faces staring up at me, their expressions suddenly more sinister. My mind raced for an explanation, but none came. I turned sharply, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but the room felt different now, the air pressing against me like unseen hands. A creaking sound echoed from the hallway, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, my body rigid as I listened. The sound came again, closer this time, the floorboards groaning beneath an unseen weight. Something was moving toward me. I backed away, my shoulder bumping against the desk, sending a few photographs fluttering to the ground. My gaze darted to the doorway, my pulse pounding in my ears. The hallway was empty, but the air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't see. Then, from just beyond the doorway, a whisper. It was low, almost inaudible, but unmistakably real. My muscles locked, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The whisper came again, closer this time, threading through the air like a breath against my ear. I turned and ran, my footsteps slamming against the warped floorboards. The hallway stretched before me, longer than I remembered, the portraits on the walls blurring as I passed. The air felt thick, pulling at me like unseen hands trying to slow me down. I reached the foyer, my fingers fumbling for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. A shadow moved in the reflection of the cracked mirror above the fireplace. My breath hitched as I turned, my eyes locking onto the shape standing at the top of the staircase. It was tall, its form shifting like smoke, its head tilted in silent observation. My heart slammed against my ribs as I yanked at the door again, my hands slick with sweat. A sharp creak echoed through the room as the figure took a step down, then another. Each movement was slow, deliberate, the air growing colder with every inch it closed between us. My vision blurred as panic took hold, my fingers clawing at the wood, desperate to escape. The whisper came again, this time from right behind me. The breath of it brushed my neck, sending a violent shudder through me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, only the empty space where I had just stood. The mansion seemed to hume around me, its silence heavier than before, as if something had just retreated into the walls. The door suddenly gave way, throwing me forward onto the crumbling porch. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I stumbled down the steps. The air outside was sharp and cold, burning my lungs as I ran. The mansion loomed behind me, its dark windows empty, lifeless. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I yanked the door open, I couldn't resist one last glance at the house. The front door stood wide open, swinging slightly as if bidding me farewell. And in the nearest window, just barely visible against the darkness, a shadow stood watching. Story 5. The amusement park had been closed for decades, left to decay beneath layers of rust and creeping vines. The entrance sign hung lopsided, the once bright letters now faded and cracked. Beyond the broken gates, the skeletal remains of roller coasters loomed against the gray sky, their tracks twisted and warped with time. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and rusted metal, a reminder of what had been left behind. I stepped cautiously over fallen beams and shattered glass, my footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass. The wind whistled through the hollow buildings, creating an eerie, mournful sound. Booths that once held prizes now stood empty, their shelves bare and rotting. A faded clown face on one of the stands grinned at me, its paint peeling, its hollow eyes following me as I moved past. A chill ran through me as I wandered deeper into the park. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of a rusted ride shifting in the wind. I had heard stories about this place, about the accidents that led to its closure, but I never put much stock in them. Now, standing in the middle of the forgotten ruins, I wasn't so sure. Then I heard it. A faint, warbling melody drifting through the air. It was slow and off-key, the kind of tune that once would have been cheerful but now felt deeply unsettling. I followed the sound, my pulse quickening with each step. Rounding a bend, I came to a clearing where a carousel stood, its faded horses frozen in mid-gallop. The ride should have been lifeless, yet the music played as if someone had just turned it on. The carousel spun sluggishly, its motion uneven, as if struggling to come back to life. The chipped paint on the horses revealed the wood beneath, their glass eyes dull and lifeless. My stomach knotted as I scanned the figures, my breath catching at what I saw. One of the horses wasn't empty. A figure sat atop it, motionless, facing me. Their clothes were old-fashioned, tattered and stained, as if they had been there for years. Their head was tilted slightly, and though their features were blurred by distance, I knew they were staring directly at me. The longer I looked, the more I felt an unbearable pressure building in my chest. I wanted to run, but my feet refused to move. The carousel creaked, the horse beneath the figure rocking slightly. The music grew distorted, warping into a drawn-out, discordant hum. My fingers twitched at my sides, every instinct screaming for me to turn and leave. But I couldn't tear my gaze away. Then the figure moved. Just a slight shift, a subtle tilt of the head, but it sent a bolt of ice through my veins. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take a step back. The figure did not react. The carousel continued its slow, uneven rotation, but the figure remained fixed in place, its body rigid. A gust of wind rushed through the park, carrying whispers that sent chills down my spine. I strained to make sense of them, but they melted into the music, merging into a twisted lullaby. The air around me felt charged, electric, as if the entire park was holding its breath. I didn't know why, but I had the overwhelming feeling that I was not supposed to be here. I forced my legs to move, stepping backward, my eyes locked on the figure. My foot caught on something, sending me stumbling, my hands scraping against the gravel. The moment I hit the ground, the music stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Heart hammering, I scrambled to my feet, sucking in sharp breaths. The carousel had stopped spinning, frozen mid-motion. The figure was still on the horse, but something was different. Their head was no longer tilted. It was upright now, staring straight ahead. I knew without a doubt that if I had stayed any longer, they would have turned to face me completely. I took another step back, and then another, my body tense and ready to bolt. The air around me felt thick, pressing in from all sides. As I turned to leave, the sound sliced through the silence, a slow, deliberate creak. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran, weaving through the crumbling remains of the park, my pulse pounding in my ears. The whispering voices followed me, growing louder, more insistent. My vision blurred as I reached the entrance, my hands fumbling with the rusted gate. It groaned as I shoved it open, the hinges protesting against years of neglect. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything stopped. The voices, the pressure in the air, even the wind had all vanished in an instant. I turned, breathless, staring back at the park. The carousel stood motionless in the distance, as if nothing had happened. But the figure was gone. A wave of nausea rolled over me as I stumbled toward my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I needed to leave, needed to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the empty road, refusing to glance in the rearview mirror. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying the events over and over. I kept expecting to see something in my peripheral vision, something lurking just out of sight, but nothing came. The further I got from the park, the lighter the air felt, as if I had left something behind. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every shadow of the shadow sent my heart racing. The image of the figure on the carousel burned itself into my mind, refusing to fade. Even with my eyes closed, I could feel them watching. The next morning, curiosity got the best of me. I searched for information on the park, anything that might explain what I had seen. Most articles focused on the park's closure, citing safety violations and financial struggles. But buried deep in an old newspaper archive, I found something else. A report from decades ago detailed the disappearance of a young girl on the carousel. Witnesses claimed she had been riding one of the horses when the ride suddenly stopped. When they turned to look, she was gone, vanished without a trace. Some believed she had run away, others thought she had fallen and been overlooked. But the strangest part was what the ride operator had said. He swore the carousel had still been moving when she disappeared, and when it stopped, he saw a figure sitting on her horse, staring directly at him. Story 6. The school had been abandoned for decades, its once bright walls now coated in grime and dust. Vines crept through broken windows, curling around rusted lockers and cracked tiles. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, carrying the whispers of a place long forgotten. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallways, the sound swallowed by the vast silence around me. Classrooms stood frozen in time, their desks still arranged in neat rows beneath collapsed ceilings. Faded posters clung to the walls, their edges curling like brittle paper. A few textbooks lay scattered on the floor, their pages yellowed and torn. The eerie stillness of the place made it feel as if the students had simply vanished one day, leaving everything behind. I wandered past the main office, its glass door shattered, a layer of dust covering the scattered paperwork inside. The intercom system, long broken, hung from the ceiling by a tangle of exposed wires. A row of rusted lockers lined the hallway, some hanging open while others remained locked, their paint chipped and peeling. One of them, near the end of the corridor, stood slightly ajar. Something about it caught my attention, a strange pull urging me forward. The metal door groaned as I swung it open, revealing stacks of crumbling papers inside. Old notebooks, faded photographs, and torn schedules were piled carelessly, untouched for years. My fingers brushed against the edges, lifting a few pages to examine the faded ink beneath. Then my heart stopped. One of the papers had my name scrawled across the top, the letters bold and unmistakable. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, eyes scanning the words beneath my name. The paper detailed events that had never happened, at least, not yet. The first entry described my visit to the school, word for word. It mentioned the broken intercom, the dust-covered office, even the locker I had just opened. The date at the top was today's date, written in smudged black ink. My breath hitched as I flipped to the next entry, dreading what I might find. It spoke of something yet to come, something waiting in the depths of the school. My footsteps, my hesitation, even the way my pulse quickened as I read it was all there. Then, at the very bottom, the ink was smeared, as if someone had tried to erase it. Only 2 words remained, written over and over again. Leave now. A chill ran down my spine, and I instinctively turned to check the hallway behind me. The school was as silent as before, the shadows stretching long under the dim light filtering through the broken windows. My grip on the paper tightened, my breath unsteady. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it as a cruel joke, but something deep inside whispered otherwise. I shoved the paper into my pocket and backed away from the locker. A sudden creak echoed from down the hall, the sound sharp and deliberate. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs as I turned toward the noise, scanning the dim corridor. Nothing moved, yet the air felt heavier, as if something unseen had stirred. I forced myself to move, stepping carefully over broken tiles as I made my way toward the exit. The paper in my pocket felt like a weight, its presence pressing against me with each step. Then, just as I reached the front doors, a loud slam echoed from behind me. It came from the direction of the locker I had opened. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway was still empty, but the locker door now stood wide open, swinging slightly as if something had just been inside. The silence grew oppressive, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I took another step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. Then, the intercom crackled to life. Static filled the air, distorted and broken, sending a sharp jolt through my spine. My breath hitched as a voice pushed through the interference, warped and distant. It whispered my name, slow and deliberate, dragging out each syllable. I bolted. My feet pounded against the floor as I sprinted toward the entrance, my pulse roaring in my ears. The sound of the intercom followed me, the static growing louder, more distorted. The school seemed to stretch around me, the hallways twisting into unfamiliar shapes, as if trying to trap me within. The exit loomed ahead, the door slightly ajar, a sliver of daylight spilling through. My fingers grazed the handle just as a deafening bang erupted behind me. The lights, long dead, flickered once, illuminating the hallway for the briefest moment. In that flash, I saw it. A figure stood near the lockers, its shape barely human, its face obscured by shadow. It didn't move, didn't breathe, only watched. The flickering light vanished, plunging the school back into darkness. I didn't hesitate. I threw the door open and stumbled outside, gasping as the cold air hit me. I didn't stop running until I was far from the building, my legs burning from the effort. Only when I reached my car did I finally turn back. The school stood silent, its broken windows reflecting the dull gray sky. The intercom had gone quiet, the whispers fading into nothing. I pulled the paper from my pocket, my hands still shaking. The ink had smudged further, but the final words remained clear. Leave now. A date had been scrawled beneath it, one I hadn't noticed before. Tomorrow's date. I didn't return to the school, nor did I tell anyone what I had found. But that night, as I lay in bed, a strange sensation crept over me. The feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes lingering just beyond the edge of the darkness. And somewhere, deep within the silence of that abandoned school, I knew the intercom still crackled with static, whispering my name. Story 7. The house stood deep in the woods, its frame barely visible between the towering trees. The path leading to it was overgrown, branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. It had the look of something long forgotten, a structure nature was slowly reclaiming. Yet as I got closer, I noticed something strange, the scent of fresh paint lingering in the air. Pushing the door open, The hinges groaned in protest, sending a sharp echo through the empty space. The inside was dim, dust swirling in the faint light filtering through cracked windows. The walls were in terrible shape, their surfaces peeling and crumbling, yet the unmistakable scent of new paint clung to the air. It was as if someone had tried to cover the decay, to preserve something that was already too far gone. I stepped further inside, my boots leaving faint imprints in the dust-covered floorboards. The silence was thick, pressing in on all sides, amplifying the sound of my own breathing. A broken chair lay overturned near the entrance, its wood splintered as if someone had left in a hurry. The deeper I walked, the stronger the paint smell became, making my head swim. In the hallway, faded wallpaper curled away from the walls, revealing brittle wooden planks underneath. Some sections had been sloppily painted over, uneven strokes covering the damage. The contrast between the fresh paint and the ruined house made my stomach twist. Someone had been here recently, someone trying to make this place look presentable. A faint creak echoed from deeper inside, a sound too deliberate to be the house settling. I held my breath, straining to listen, but the silence returned just as quickly. My heart pounded as I debated whether to keep going or turn back. But something about the place wouldn't let me leave, an invisible thread pulling me forward. I reached a doorway at the end of the hall, its frame warped with age. Pushing it open, I stepped into what must have once been a living room. A fireplace stood cold and empty, its bricks blackened with soot. Furniture was still in place, a sagging couch covered in a tattered white sheet, as if someone had tried to preserve it. But what caught my attention most was the coffee table, its surface freshly painted, gleaming under the dim light. The contrast was unsettling, the bright paint too clean, too deliberate against the surrounding decay. I ran my fingers along the surface, feeling the tacky texture of paint that hadn't fully dried. Whoever had done this had been here recently, possibly just before I arrived. The thought sent a shiver up my spine. A sudden noise upstairs made me jolt, my breath catching in my throat. It was soft, almost like the shuffle of footsteps, barely audible over the silence. My eyes darted toward the staircase at the far end of the room. The railing was chipped, the steps covered in dust except for one. A single footprint was pressed into the grime, fresh and distinct. I should have turned back then, should have left without another thought. But something about the mystery gnawed at me, urging me to press on. With careful steps, I moved toward the stairs, each board creaking under my weight. The air grew heavier the higher I climbed, the scent of paint thick enough to make my head ache. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before me, its doors hanging open like gaping mouths. The first room I peered into was empty, save for a single chair facing the window. The second was much the same, its bed frame stripped bare, dust collecting in the corners. Then I reached the third door, the only one that was closed. Something about it felt wrong, as if the air around it was charged, waiting. My fingers hesitated on the knob before finally turning it. The door swung open to reveal a bedroom frozen in time. The furniture was intact, the bed made, and the dresser free of dust, as if someone had been living there. But the most unsettling detail was the walls. They had been freshly painted. Unlike the rest of the house, there was no peeling, no cracks, just smooth, pristine surfaces that gleamed unnaturally. The room felt untouched, as if whoever had painted it had finished only moments ago. My skin prickled, an overwhelming sense of being watched creeping over me. I turned to leave, but then I saw a single handprint smeared into the paint near the doorframe. The print was small, almost childlike. The fingers stretched unnaturally long. It looked as though someone had pressed their hand into the wet paint and dragged it downward. The realization sent ice through my veins. A noise behind me made my body seize a whisper soft exhale, too close, too real. My heart slammed against my ribs as I spun around, but the room was empty. The air was still, the shadows undisturbed, yet every instinct in me screamed that I wasn't alone. I stepped backward, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Then, from the far corner of the room, the closet door creaked open. The darkness within was impenetrable, a void that swallowed the light. A faint shift of movement caught my eye, something shifting just beyond the threshold. I didn't wait to see what it was. I bolted from the room, my feet pounding against the floor as I stumbled toward the stairs. The scent of fresh paint was suffocating now, clinging to my clothes, my skin. As I descended, the house seemed to groan around me, the walls pressing in, as if urging me out. The moment my feet hit the first floor, I sprinted for the door. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the front entrance seeming farther away than before. A cold draft rushed past me, carrying a whisper of something I couldn't understand. I didn't look back. Bursting through the front door, I stumbled into the overgrown yard, my chest heaving with each breath. The house loomed behind me, silent and watching. The scent of paint still clung to the air, a reminder that I hadn't been alone in there. As I backed away, my eyes caught movement in one of the upstairs windows. A figure stood just beyond the glass, barely visible in the dim light. I couldn't make out its face, only the outline of something thin, unmoving. Then, slowly it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. A perfect handprint smeared across the surface, fresh, wet, and dripping with paint. Story 8. The asylum loomed in the distance, its silhouette jagged against the gray evening sky. Vines had crept up the sides of the crumbling structure, weaving through shattered windows and rusted bars. The entrance doors were slightly ajar, a silent invitation that sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated only a moment before stepping inside, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something stale. The lobby was vast, with a reception desk covered in dust and broken glass scattered across the floor. Old wheelchairs sat abandoned in corners, their frames rusted and wheels locked in place. The remnants of paperwork fluttered along the ground, disturbed only by the occasional draft. Faint markings on the walls hinted at past security measures, though they had long since faded. I moved cautiously down a hallway, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the silence. The peeling wallpaper curled like dead skin, revealing rotting wood beneath. Doorways yawned open into rooms filled with shattered furniture, their contents left to decay over time. The deeper I ventured, the more the air felt heavy, as though the asylum itself was watching. At the end of the corridor, I noticed a door that was unlike the others. It stood perfectly closed, its paint still intact, as if untouched by the years of neglect. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle, the metal icy beneath my grip. With a slow, deliberate push, the door creaked open, revealing a room frozen in time. The walls were unmarked, the floorboards free of dust as though someone had swept them clean. The only piece of furniture was a single wooden chair, positioned in the far corner. It faced the wall, rigid and deliberate, as if someone had been placed there and left to wait. The sight of it made my stomach clench, an unshakable sense of unease settling deep within me. I took a hesitant step inside, my breath shallow as I surveyed the room. The silence here was different, deafening, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. My gaze lingered on the chair, every instinct screaming for me to leave it untouched. Yet an inexplicable pull kept me rooted in place, unable to turn away. A draft slithered through the open door, carrying with it the faint scent of something old and decayed. The wooden floor beneath me groaned softly, though I hadn't moved. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take another step forward, the stillness of the chair almost daring me to disturb it. My fingers itched with the need to reach out, to confirm that it was just an object and nothing more. Just as I gathered the nerve to move closer, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath curled in the air, the sudden chill wrapping around me like an unseen grip. The walls felt closer, the space around me tightening with an unspoken presence. A sharp creak split the silence, and my pulse pounded as the chair shifted just slightly, but enough. The movement was slow, deliberate, the legs of the chair scraping lightly against the wooden floor. My body tensed, my instincts screaming at me to run, yet I remained frozen. The air grew thick with something unseen, a pressure that settled deep in my chest. Then, the chair stopped moving, as if whoever had been sitting there had returned. A breath, soft, rattling, whispered from the corner. It wasn't mine. My skin prickled as I fought the urge to look behind me, every nerve in my body firing with an overwhelming sense of dread. The room was empty, yet I was no longer alone. I forced myself to take a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. A sudden knock echoed from the hallway, sharp and hollow, as if something or someone was announcing its presence. I spun toward the doorway, expecting to see movement, but the corridor remained empty. My breath came in shallow gasps, my fingers curling into fists to stop them from trembling. Then, from behind me, the chair groaned again. I turned just in time to see it move, this time shifting an inch closer to the wall. My chest tightened, the weight of something unseen pressing harder against me. The feeling of being watched was unbearable, a presence lingering just beyond my perception. My body finally obeyed, and I stumbled backward toward the exit, my pulse roaring in my ears. The moment I crossed the threshold, the pressure lifted, but the cold lingered on my skin. I forced myself down the hallway, my steps quick and unsteady. The knocking sound followed me, irregular and taunting, like a presence urging me to turn back. I didn't dare look over my shoulder, knowing deep down that I wouldn't like what I saw. As I neared the entrance, the air shifted, thick with the scent of dust and something bitter. The asylum's decayed walls seemed to close in, the building unwilling to let me go. My fingers fumbled for the doorframe, desperate to put distance between myself and the room. Just as I stepped outside, the sound of the chair scraping one last time echoed through walls. I didn't stop running until I was far from the asylum, the weight of unseen eyes still clinging to me. My breath came in ragged bursts, my mind replaying the way the chair had moved on its own. The rational part of me wanted to believe it had been a trick of the light, a shift in the old flooring. But deep down, I knew something had been waiting in that room. Days passed, yet the memory of that moment refused to fade. I dreamt of the chair, always facing the wall, always waiting. The silence in my apartment felt suffocating, the echoes of unseen whispers pressing against my thoughts. Then, late one night, as I sat alone in my living room, a single, unmistakable sound filled the space. A chair, creaking as it shifted ever so slightly behind me. Story 9. The train station was a hollow shell of what it once had been, its grand structure now a graveyard of rust and decay. Vines twisted through shattered windows, their tendrils creeping over wooden benches that had long since splintered. The air carried the scent of damp earth and something metallic, something old. My footsteps echoed in the silence, swallowed by the cavernous space that stretched before me. Dust-coated signage hung from rusted chains, the names of destinations barely legible beneath years of neglect. The ticket booth stood at the far end of the station, its glass cracked but still intact. The wood was warped, its paint peeling in long, curling strips. I hesitated before stepping closer, drawn by the eerie sense that someone had stood there not long ago. The machine, an ancient relic of another era, sat beneath the counter, Its metal frame was tarnished, its buttons dulled by time. I reached out hesitantly, my fingers brushing against the cold surface. The moment I touched it, a deep mechanical whir filled the air, the machine springing to life with an unnatural urgency. The slot beneath the buttons clicked, and a small, yellowed ticket emerged. I snatched it without thinking, my breath hitching as my eyes scanned the faded ink. The time printed on it sent a chill down my spine. It was the exact minute I had stepped into the station. My pulse pounded, the weight of the impossible pressing against my ribs. I turned, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the station remained empty. The machine let out a final wheeze before falling silent, as if it had never been alive in the first place. The atmosphere had shifted, the air thick with something unseen. The sensation of being observed slithered over my skin, raising the hairs on my arms. The platform stretched into darkness, the tracks barely visible beneath layers of dust and fallen leaves. A rusted train car sat abandoned at the far end, its windows fogged with age. A flickering light from within cast weak illumination onto the surrounding platform, its glow unsteady. The ticket burned in my palm, its significance gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I took a tentative step forward, my boots scuffing against loose gravel. The silence was no longer comforting but oppressive, pressing in on all sides. The old train loomed ahead, its presence unnatural, as if it had never truly left service. My fingers clenched around the ticket, an irrational sense of duty urging me forward. The door to the train was ajar, its hinges rusted but sturdy. I pushed against it, the metal groaning beneath my touch. The interior was frozen in time, rows of seats coated in dust, their cushions torn and gutted. Overhead lights flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that danced across the walls. At the far end of the car, another ticket machine sat waiting. Unlike the one in the booth, this one was pristine, untouched by decay. My breath came in shallow gasps as I approached, my every instinct warning me to leave. But something deeper urged me on, a pull I could neither explain nor resist. The machine hummed, its gears turning despite the years of abandonment. A second ticket slid from the slot, identical to the first except for one difference. The time printed was 5 minutes into the future, a time that had not yet passed. My grip tightened, my mind racing to make sense of the impossible. A distant chime echoed through the station, deep and reverberating, like an old departure bell. The ground beneath my feet vibrated slightly, as if something massive had stirred. I turned sharply, my eyes scanning the platform beyond the train car, searching for movement. The tracks, once silent and lifeless, now hummed with an energy I could not see. The air thickened, the dim station lights flickering in an unnatural rhythm. A gust of wind rushed through the car, carrying whispers that were just out of reach, voices speaking in tones I could not understand. The sensation of being watched grew unbearable, pressing against me from every angle. A rusted sign creaked overhead, swinging slightly despite the still air. The words upon it, once faded and unreadable, now burned with clarity. Final boarding. My heart pounded as a low rumble filled the space, the very station itself seeming to breathe around me. The train let out a sharp hiss, the sound of pressurized air escaping unseen vents. The doors, once motionless, began to slide shut with agonizing slowness. Panic surged through me, my feet stumbling backward, but the pull remained. My fingers loosened around the tickets, the paper fluttering slightly in my grasp. A shape moved at the far end of the car, shifting in the dim light. My breath caught as I realized it was a figure, standing in the doorway of the next train car, perfectly still. I could not see their face, only the silhouette of a long coat and an impossibly straight posture. They did not move, yet their presence swallowed the space between us, The whispers grew louder, circling my head like unseen hands reaching, grasping. The ticket machine let out one final click, another slip of paper sliding into view. I did not dare take it, but my eyes locked onto the numbers. The time printed was 5 minutes past the one before. A countdown. In a hun. The train lurched, its wheels groaning against the rusted tracks. The station around me blurred, the shadows stretching unnaturally as if pulled by unseen forces. The figure remained in the doorway, unmoving, patient. I did not wait to see what came next. I ran, my legs carrying me faster than I thought possible. The platform was a blur beneath my feet, the once dead station alive with the energy of something I could not comprehend. The whispers chased me, swirling around my head, promising things I dared not understand. The exit loomed ahead, the doorway nothing more than a dark void leading back to the world I had left behind. I threw myself forward, my body tumbling onto the cracked pavement outside. The cold night air hit me like a wave, sharp and clean. The station behind me was silent once more. I turned, expecting to see the train, the figure, the impossible reality of what I had experienced. But the station was empty. The rusted tracks stretched into nothingness, the ticket booth silent and still. The paper in my hand remained, the ink crisp and fresh, marking the exact moment I had stepped inside. Story 10. The hospital had been abandoned for years, yet the air still carried the faint scent of antiseptic and decay. The hallways were lined with rusted gurneys and shattered glass, the remnants of a place once filled with life. My footsteps echoed through the emptiness, the only sound accompanying me aside from the occasional groan of the building settling. I moved cautiously, the beam of my flashlight sweeping over peeling paint and faded warning signs. A chart hung loosely from a broken clipboard, its ink smudged beyond recognition. As I walked deeper, a strange sense of unease crept over me, like I was being watched by unseen eyes. A rusted door at the end of the hall caught my attention, slightly ajar as if inviting me in. I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with rows of hospital beds. Most were covered in dust and debris, their once white sheets now gray with neglect. But one bed stood out. It was clean, pristine even, though streaked with fresh blood. My breath hitched as I stepped closer, my flashlight trembling in my grasp. A small tag dangled from the metal frame, its letters bold and unmistakable. My name was printed in neat black ink, along with a date, today's date, marked with the exact time I had entered the room. Panic gripped my chest as I stumbled back, my mind struggling to rationalize what I was seeing. The blood on the sheets looked fresh, the scent of iron sharp in the air. There was no dust on the bed, no signs of age like the rest of the hospital. It was as if someone had prepared it just for me. A sudden noise from the hallway made my pulse race. A soft shuffling sound like bare feet against tile moved closer. I turned quickly, scanning the entrance, but there was nothing there. Only the long, empty hallway stretching into darkness. I forced myself to step away from the bed, my instincts screaming at me to leave. The shadows seemed to shift as I moved, stretching unnaturally against the dim light. I reached the door, but just as I was about to step out, something cold brushed against my arm. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. The room was the same rows of silent beds, the blood-stained one waiting in the center. But I felt it now, a presence lingering just beyond my sight, watching, waiting. A faint whisper tickled my ear, too soft to make out the words. My skin prickled as I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. The whisper came again, closer this time, and I realized with dawning horror that it was my own name. I bolted down the hallway, my footsteps echoing wildly. The whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. The air turned thick, oppressive, as if the hospital itself was closing in around me. I reached the entrance, my hands shaking as I shoved the heavy door open. The cold night air hit me like a wave, snapping me back to reality. I stumbled outside, my breath ragged, my heart pounding against my ribs. The building loomed behind me, dark and silent, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Something inside had been waiting, and it had known I was coming. I turned back once, my flashlight beam flickering against the broken windows. A shadow moved just beyond the glass, shifting, watching. Then the door slammed shut behind me, the sound ringing through the night like a final warning. I didn't look back again. I ran, leaving the hospital and whatever had been inside it behind. But as I reached my car, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the hood, scrawled in fresh, red letters, was my name written in the same shaky hand as the tag on the bed. Story 11. The hospital loomed ahead, its once white walls stained with time and neglect. Windows were shattered, their jagged edges framing the darkness beyond. The entrance doors hung open, swaying slightly as if breathing. A foul stench of mildew and rot filled the air, thick and suffocating. I stepped inside, my footsteps muffled by the debris covering the floor. Old patient files were scattered, their pages yellowed and curling at the edges. Wheelchairs sat abandoned in the hallway, their rusted frames frozen in time. Faintly, the wind howled through broken windows, carrying whispers of a forgotten past. The deeper I went, the more the shadows seemed to press in. The fluorescent lights overhead were long dead, leaving only slivers of moonlight to guide me. I passed rooms with rusted bed frames and shattered monitors, their screens coated in dust. A faint scratching sound echoed somewhere, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. At the end of the hall, a door stood ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. A low buzzing sound drifted from within, steady and rhythmic. The noise sent an uneasy shiver down my spine, its tone unnatural in the otherwise silent building. It sounded like a phone vibrating against the floor. I pushed the door open further, revealing a room swallowed in shadows. The buzzing grew louder, persistent, insistent. My eyes adjusted slowly, picking out vague shapes: a rusted gurney, overturned cabinets, something crumpled in the corner. Then I saw it. A phone lay face down in the middle of the room, its screen flickering against the dust-coated tiles. The vibration sent small pulses of movement through the grime, the sound grating against the silence. I stepped closer, my breath catching as I saw the name flashing on the screen. My name. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I stared at the glowing display. The call was coming from an unknown number, but the name was unmistakable. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. The phone vibrated one last time before falling silent. For a long moment I just stood there, the darkness pressing in around me. My name on the screen, how was that possible? I hadn't given anyone my number, and my own phone was still in my pocket. My fingers trembled as I reached down, hesitating before picking it up. The screen remained lit, showing the missed call notification. No voicemail, no message. Just my name, lingering on the screen like a warning. My thumb hovered over the radio button, my curiosity battling against every instinct telling me to leave. Before I could decide, the phone vibrated again. The screen flickered once before going dark. Then, from the corner of the room, something moved. A soft shuffling sound, barely more than a whisper against the dust-covered floor. My breath hitched, and I took a slow step back. The air felt heavier, thick with something unseen but present. My fingers clenched around the phone as I strained my eyes toward the shadowed corner. A shape was there. At first it was barely noticeable, blending into the darkness like a trick of the light. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it more clearly. A figure crouched low, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles, its head tilted slightly, as if watching me. The phone buzzed again in my grip, making me flinch. The vibration echoed too loudly in the silence, setting my nerves on edge. I glanced down at the screen, dread curling in my stomach. The caller ID had changed. Unknown caller. Slowly, I raised my eyes back to the figure. It was standing now. I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my throat. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze locked onto me. The air between us stretched thin, a charged stillness settling over the room. The phone buzzed again, the sound drilling into my skull. My breathing grew ragged as I backed toward the door. I didn't dare turn away, afraid of what might happen if I did. My fingers fumbled for the handle, slick with sweat as I yanked it open. The hallway beyond seemed impossibly long, stretching into an endless void. Then, the buzzing stopped. The silence was sudden, suffocating. My heartbeat roared in my ears as I took another step back. The figure remained still, its form blending into the shadows. I turned and ran. My feet pounded against the grimy tiles as I raced through the corridors. The darkness seemed thicker now, the walls pressing in as if trying to swallow me whole. Doors loomed on either side, their hinges groaning as I passed. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the broken windows. I reached the main hall, my chest burning as I stumbled toward the exit. The doors stood open, just as I had left them. Moonlight streamed in, a beacon calling me forward. But just as I reached the threshold, the phone buzzed one last time. I skidded to a halt, dread anchoring me in place. My grip tightened around the device, my knuckles white. Slowly, I lifted the screen to my eyes. One new message, from me. My breath came in shallow gasps as I forced my thumb to open it. The message was short, only 3 words. Words that sent ice crawling through my veins. Don't look back. The wind outside died. The world fell into an eerie stillness. My pulse pounded as every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. But something deep inside whispered that I had to know. I turned my head just slightly, just enough to see the reflection in the shattered glass beside me. The figure was right behind me. Story 12. The mansion stood at the edge of the forest, its towering frame barely holding against the weight of time. Vines coiled around the columns, and the front doors hung slightly ajar as if inviting me in. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but the overcast sky above. The place had been abandoned for years, yet something about it felt disturbingly alive. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing across the grand foyer. Dust coated the wooden floors and the air smelled of decay and something else, something faintly metallic. A chandelier dangled from the ceiling, its crystals dulled with grime. Despite the stillness, a strange warmth clung to the air, as if the house had been occupied not too long ago. I moved deeper inside, passing faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. The furniture remained untouched, draped in white sheets that sagged under layers of dust. A broken clock on the wall ticked faintly, even though its hands never moved. The silence pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating. The scent of something cooking drifted through the air, pulling me toward the kitchen. It was faint but unmistakable, a mix of herbs and something savory. My heart pounded as I reached the doorway, gripping the frame as I peered inside. The kitchen was intact, unlike the rest of the house, as though someone had been tending to it all this time. A pot sat on the rusted stove, steam rising from beneath its lid. The faint, bubbling sound sent a shiver through me, my breath catching in my throat. The lid rattled slightly as if something was moving inside. The longer I stared, the more I became certain I wasn't alone. I swallowed hard, taking a cautious step forward. The stove was ancient, covered in grime, yet the burner beneath the pot glowed a soft orange. My mind struggled to make sense of it. No electricity, no gas supply, yet the flame flickered steadily as though it had been burning for hours. The pot gave a sudden, violent jolt, making me jump. My pulse pounded as I reached for the lid, my fingers trembling against the handle. Slowly I lifted it, steam rising in a thick cloud that smelled of something familiar, something wrong. The contents inside were dark, murky, and in the swirling liquid, something moved. A pale hand surfaced from the depths, its fingers twitching. I staggered back, the lid slipping from my grasp and clattering onto the floor. The hand sank slowly, vanishing beneath the bubbling surface, leaving only ripples behind. My stomach twisted as I stumbled away, nearly knocking over a stack of rotting dishes. A soft creaking noise filled the kitchen, and I spun around, my breath hitching. The door I had entered through was now slightly closed, though I hadn't touched it. My hand shook as I backed toward the hallway, trying to keep my focus on the room around me. The pot still bubbled, the faint whisper of something stirring within. The walls felt closer now, the air thick with an unshakable presence. The kitchen had been waiting for someone, and I had stepped right into its grasp. The faded wallpaper curled at the edges, revealing dark stains beneath. Shadows flickered unnaturally in the corners, stretching, shifting. A whisper brushed against my ear, too soft to make out. My chest tightened, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave. I turned sharply and rushed toward the door, shoving it open with more force than necessary. The hallway seemed darker than before, the portraits on the walls staring with hollow, lifeless eyes. My footsteps felt too loud as I hurried toward the entrance. The house groaned around me as if it knew I was trying to leave. The smell of the simmering pot still clung to my clothes, thick and suffocating. I didn't dare look back, not until I reached the front door. The handle was ice cold under my grip, but it wouldn't budge. My fingers tightened as I pulled harder, my breath coming in short gasps. Behind me, the whispering grew louder, closer, like voices rising just beneath the surface of the air. My stomach knotted as I turned, my back pressed against the door. The kitchen doorway was now nothing but darkness, the light inside completely swallowed. The whispering turned to a low hum, vibrating through the walls, the floors, the very air around me. My heart slammed against my ribs as I yanked at the door one last time, the force nearly sending me tumbling outside when it finally gave way. I stumbled onto the porch, gulping in the damp, cool air. The mansion loomed behind me, its open door a gaping mouth that threatened to swallow me whole. My legs felt weak as I forced myself to step away, my body still trembling from whatever had just happened inside. The simmering pot, the moving hand, none of it made sense. The house had been abandoned for decades, yet something had been waiting within. My fingers still felt numb from gripping the lid, the phantom heat of the stove lingering on my skin. I took one last look at the mansion before turning away. The shadows in the windows shifted slightly, just enough for me to see. The kitchen, once hidden behind the darkness, flickered with a soft orange glow. The stove was still burning. Story 13. The air inside the abandoned theater was thick with dust and the scent of old velvet. Faint beams of light filtered through cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long shadows across the worn-out carpet. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft creak of the floorboards beneath my steps. Rows of tattered red seats stretched out before me, their once luxurious fabric faded and torn. A grand chandelier, now dulled by years of neglect, hung precariously from the ceiling. The stage loomed in the distance, its curtains stiff with dust, frozen in time. My fingers trailed along the back of a seat as I made my way down the aisle. An eerie stillness clung to the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. In the front row, an empty seat stood out, as though waiting for someone to sit. I hesitated before lowering myself into the chair, the worn cushion sinking beneath my weight. As soon as I settled, a low hum filled the theater, followed by the mechanical whir of a projector. My breath hitched as the screen flickered to life, illuminating the darkened space. The image was grainy at first, the reel crackling as it gained focus. A figure appeared on the screen, moving cautiously through the theater's entrance. My stomach twisted as I realized I was watching myself mere moments ago, stepping into the building. A cold chill crawled down my spine as I remained frozen in my seat. The film continued, showing me walking down the aisle, brushing my fingers over the chairs just as I had done. It was as if the theater had captured my every movement and was now replaying it back to me. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. The screen showed me reaching the front row, my expression one of wary curiosity. Then, just as I sat down in the film, my real body stiffened as the reel jumped and the image changed. Instead of continuing with what had just happened, the screen now showed something new. The camera angle had shifted, filming from behind me, as if someone or something stood in the darkness, watching. My breath caught in my throat as I glanced over my shoulder. The theater was empty, just as it had been when I entered. Yet the grainy film continued, showing a shadowy figure emerging from the rows behind me. Its movements were slow, deliberate, creeping closer with each flicker of the reel. Panic seized my chest as I forced myself to remain still. The film was ahead of reality, showing something I had not yet experienced. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but my body remained rigid, unable to move. On the screen, the shadow loomed directly behind me, close enough that I should have felt its breath on my neck. My fingers gripped the armrests, nails digging into the worn fabric. A suffocating silence filled the space as the figure raised a hand. I bolted from my seat just as the screen went dark, the sudden silence pressing in like a weight. My breath came in short gasps as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the steps. The projector let out a final mechanical whir before shutting off completely. The theater was still once more, but the air felt different now, charged with something unseen. My hands trembled as I reached for my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. The seat I had occupied was now empty, but a faint indentation remained. I turned, my footsteps hurried as I made my way toward the exit. The hush of the theater pressed against me, as if urging me to leave before something else stirred. Every instinct screamed that I was not alone, that something unseen had been waiting all along. Reaching the heavy double doors, I pushed against them, my heart hammering. They groaned in protest before finally giving way, releasing me into the cold night air. My breath came in sharp, uneven bursts as I stepped onto the street. I turned back, expecting to see only darkness beyond the broken windows. Instead, a dim glow pulsed from within, like the flickering of an old film reel struggling to play. I knew then that the theater had not shown me a recording, it had shown me a warning. The air around me felt heavy, as though something unseen lingered just beyond reach. My pulse refused to slow, my body still charged with the fear of what I had witnessed. Whatever presence remained in that theater had let me go, but I knew it would be waiting. I took one last glance at the crumbling marquee above, its missing letters forming a name long forgotten. Then, without another thought, I turned on my heel and walked away, vowing never to return. But even as I left, I knew a part of me remained trapped inside, playing on an endless loop. Story 14. The prison stood alone on the outskirts of town, its rusted gates barely clinging to their hinges. The walls, once towering and imposing, were now cracked and crumbling, vines creeping up their surface like nature reclaiming its territory. The silence around the place was suffocating, broken only by the distant call of crows circling above. A cold wind swept through the open entrance, carrying the scent of damp stone and decay. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The air was thick with dust, swirling in the dim light filtering through shattered windows. Cells lined both sides of the hallway, their iron bars rusted and bent in places. Some doors hung open, revealing dark, empty spaces where prisoners had once been confined. A sense of unease settled over me as I moved deeper into the prison. Every corner seemed to hold shadows that stretched unnaturally, twisting as if alive. Faded graffiti covered the walls, some messages scrawled in desperation, others in anger. The remnants of old uniforms lay in tatters on the floor, forgotten by time. As I turned a corner, I noticed one particular cell that sent a shiver down my spine. Unlike the others, its door was only slightly ajar, as if someone had been inside recently. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, peering through the bars. The air inside felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't explain. The walls were covered in scratches, deep, erratic marks dug into the stone, some overlapping, some fresh enough that dust had yet to settle in them. They formed no clear pattern, just frantic lines crisscrossing in every direction. My fingers hesitated before tracing one of the marks, feeling the rough grooves beneath my touch. These weren't old. The realization sent a wave of unease washing over me. The prison had been abandoned for decades, yet these scratches looked as if they had been made only hours ago. I turned slowly, scanning the dark corners of the cell block, my pulse quickening. The wind outside howled through broken windows, but inside the air was oppressively still. I looked closer at the scratches, searching for meaning in the chaos. Some lines seemed deeper than others, as if they had been carved with desperation. Then I saw something that made my breath catch. Amidst the random etchings, a word had been scratched into the stone, the letters jagged and uneven. Help. The word sent a chill through my spine. My eyes darted around the cell, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness stretching unnaturally. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the growing dread curling in my stomach. Then, from somewhere deep in the prison, I heard it. A sound. It was faint, almost too soft to be real, but unmistakable, a slow, deliberate scratching. My breath caught as I turned my head toward the noise. It came from further down the corridor, beyond the reach of the dim light. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs moved forward, driven by something I couldn't explain. The scratching grew louder with each step I took, rhythmic and deliberate. It echoed off the stone walls, filling the silence with an eerie, scraping sound. I reached another row of cells, the doors standing open like waiting mouths. The noise was coming from the last cell on the right. I hesitated before stepping closer, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The air in the hallway grew colder, each breath coming out in a faint mist. The cell ahead was pitch black, its entrance yawning open like a void. The scratching stopped. I stood frozen, listening, straining to hear beyond the pounding in my ears. The silence stretched, pressing against me like a heavy weight. Then, before I could react, something shifted inside the cell. A figure moved. My breath left me in a sharp gasp as I stumbled back, my pulse spiking. The figure was barely visible, its form blending into the darkness. It didn't move toward me but remained hunched in the corner, its presence pressing against the edges of my vision. My throat tightened as I forced myself to speak. "Who's there? Who's there?" No answer, only silence. Then, just as I was about to turn and run, the scratching started again. Slow, deliberate, carving into the stone with an unseen force. My chest tightened as I realized the figure wasn't moving, yet the sound continued. It was coming from the walls themselves. I took a step back, and the air around me seemed to shift. The walls pulsed, the scratches deepening right before my eyes. The word help appeared again, fresh and raw, as if something was etching it in real time. My legs finally obeyed, and I turned, sprinting down the corridor. The prison twisted around me, the hallways seeming longer than before. My breath came in sharp gasps as I ran, the walls closing in, the whispers of scratching following me. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin, dragging at my movements. I burst through the entrance, stumbling onto the cracked pavement outside. The moment my feet touched the ground, the air shifted, the weight lifting instantly. The wind howled through the trees, but the eerie silence inside the prison remained. I turned back, half expecting to see something watching me from the doorway, but there was nothing, only darkness. As I caught my breath, my gaze fell to my hand. My fingers trembled as I lifted them to the dim light. Tiny specks of stone dust clung to my skin, as if I had been the one making the scratches all along. Story 15. The hotel stood at the edge of town, forgotten by time and left to decay. Its sign hung lopsided, the letters barely legible beneath years of rust and grime. Ivy crept along the brick walls, weaving through broken windows and curling around the entrance. The air smelled of damp wood and dust, the scent of abandonment thick in the stillness. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing against the cracked marble floor. The lobby was frozen in time, with tattered chairs arranged neatly and a reception desk coated in dust. A grand chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled and cobwebbed, swaying slightly despite the absence of wind. A guest book lay open on the counter, its last entry dated decades ago, the ink faded to near invisibility. The silence pressed in as I moved deeper into the hotel, my breath shallow in the stagnant air. Faded wallpaper peeled in curling strips, revealing water-stained plaster beneath. A staircase wound upward, its steps groaning under my weight as I ascended. My fingers trailed along the wooden railing, the dust thick enough to cling to my skin. The second floor was lined with doors, some hanging open, revealing rooms stripped of their furniture. Others were locked, their brass handles tarnished and cold to the touch. The hallway stretched on, dimly lit by the sunlight filtering through shattered windows. The air felt colder here, thick with the weight of something unseen. I turned a corner and found a door that stood slightly ajar, its frame oddly untouched by the decay around it. The number plate gleamed, as though it had been polished recently. A strange feeling settled in my chest as I pushed the door open, the hinges silent, as if welcoming me inside. The room was pristine, untouched by time in a way that made my skin prickle. The bed was neatly made, its white sheets smooth and crisp. A wooden dresser stood against the far wall, a vase of dried flowers resting on top. The air smelled faintly of lavender, a sharp contrast to the musty scent of the hallway. I took a cautious step inside, my pulse quickening as I scanned the room. The carpet was thick with dust except for a single path leading from the doorway to the window. The curtains were drawn back, revealing a wide pane of glass overlooking the empty street below. And standing just beyond the glass was a figure, motionless in the fading light. My breath caught in my throat as I took an involuntary step closer. The figure was tall, its features obscured by the reflection of the setting sun. Their posture was rigid, their head tilted slightly as if watching me. A chill crawled down my spine, every instinct screaming for me to turn back. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the curtain, the air suddenly too heavy to breathe. The figure did not move, did not shift or blink, only stood in silent observation. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs as I reached for the window latch, my hands slick with sweat. But just as my fingers brushed the glass, the figure was gone. The street outside was empty, stretching out in eerie stillness beneath the darkening sky. No footprints marked the dust-covered pavement, no sign that anyone had been there. My reflection stared back at me, pale and unnerved, the room suddenly feeling much smaller than before. A creak sounded behind me, sharp and deliberate, breaking the silence. I turned sharply, my pulse hammering as I scanned the room. The door remained open, the hallway beyond empty, yet the air carried a weight that hadn't been there before. A presence lingered, unseen but undeniable. The scent of lavender grew stronger, clinging to my skin and filling my lungs. I backed toward the doorway, my movements slow, deliberate. The room, once untouched, now felt wrong, as if I had stepped into something not meant for me. The walls seemed closer, the light dimming despite the glow of the setting sun. A whisper of movement brushed against my ear, a breath of air that sent ice through my veins. I turned, expecting to find the door behind me, but the hallway was gone. The walls stretched endlessly, doors lining each side, identical and unmarked. My chest tightened, my mind scrambling to make sense of the impossibility before me. I reached for the nearest door, my hands trembling as I turned the handle. The room beyond was identical to the one I had just left. The same made bed, the same untouched furniture. The curtains were drawn back, and beyond the glass, the figure stood once more. Closer this time, its outline sharper, its presence suffocating. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, my heart racing. I turned toward the door, but the hallway had shifted again, stretching into endless darkness. My breath came in shallow gasps as I realized I was no longer in the hotel I had entered. The walls pulsed with a quiet hum, the scent of lavender thick and cloying. The figure outside the window stepped forward, its outline pressing against the glass. A hand lifted, slow and deliberate, palm resting against the surface. My own hand, trembling and cold, rose in response, mirroring the movement against my will. The glass was warm beneath my fingers, pulsing as if alive. A whisper curled through the room, threading into my ears like a voice just beneath the surface of my mind. The figure's head tilted, its shape distorting, shifting into something that wasn't quite human. The glass rippled beneath my touch, a thin barrier between me and whatever waited beyond. The room darkened, shadows stretching along the walls, creeping toward me like fingers reaching from beneath a door. My body refused to move, locked in place by something unseen. The whisper grew louder, words forming but just out of reach, pressing against my thoughts like an uninvited guest. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the room snapped back to normal. The hallway returned, the scent of lavender fading into dust. The window stood empty, the street beyond silent and still. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled toward the door, the weight in the air lifting, leaving only the echo of something unseen. I ran down the stairs, my footsteps slamming against the old wood. The lobby stretched before me, unchanged, abandoned as it had always been. The outside air was sharp and cold as I pushed through the front doors, my lungs filling with the scent of rain and earth. As I reached my car, I glanced up one final time. The hotel loomed above me, its windows dark and lifeless. But in one window, barely visible against the night, a figure stood watching. And though I couldn't see its face, I knew without a doubt that it was still waiting for me. Story 16. The factory had been abandoned for years, its rusted frame looming against the dull gray sky. Windows were shattered, doors left ajar, and the walls were covered in peeling paint and graffiti. The air inside was thick with dust, the scent of mold and old machinery lingering in every corner. My footsteps echoed as I stepped carefully over broken tiles and scattered debris. The building had once been alive with the hum of machines and the chatter of workers. Now, silence settled over the vast space like a heavy fog. Faded safety posters clung to the walls, their warnings barely legible beneath layers of grime. A toppled chair lay near a rusted conveyor belt, its cushion torn open and stuffing spilling onto the floor. I moved deeper into the factory, weaving through rows of rusted equipment and forgotten workstations. The deeper I went, the colder the air became, a stark contrast to the warm afternoon outside. A single flickering light hung from the ceiling, casting long, shifting shadows. It shouldn't have been working. The power had been shut off long ago. A doorway appeared ahead, the paint on its frame chipped away to reveal the raw metal underneath. Above it, the faded words "break room" were still visible. Something about it unsettled me, but curiosity pushed me forward. The door creaked as I nudged it open, revealing a small, dimly lit space beyond. Inside, a row of dented lockers lined one wall, their doors ajar, revealing empty shelves and forgotten belongings. A table stood in the center, chairs pushed haphazardly around it. An old refrigerator hummed softly in the corner, a sound that made my skin crawl. The factory was supposed to be dead, yet something in this room was still running. Then I saw it. On the counter beside an old coffee maker sat a steaming mug of coffee. The aroma was rich and fresh, cutting through the stale air of the factory. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer, my hands trembling at my sides. The mug was simple, white, unremarkable except for one detail. My name was printed on the side. A wave of unease washed over me as I stared at the mug, my mind racing for an explanation. There was no one else here. The factory had been abandoned for years, left to decay and collapse on its own. Yet the coffee was fresh, as if someone had just brewed it moments before I arrived. I reached out, hesitating as my fingers hovered over the handle. The warmth radiating from the ceramic sent a shiver down my spine. It was real. Not a trick of the light, not some leftover relic from the past. Someone or something had made this for me. A faint sound echoed from the hallway, a slow, deliberate creak. I spun around, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The door to the break room stood open, revealing nothing but the empty corridor beyond. The air seemed heavier now, pressing in from all sides. I forced myself to breathe, my fingers tightening into fists. There had to be an explanation. Maybe someone else had been here recently, a squatter or urban explorer like me. Maybe it was just a coincidence that the mug had my name on it. But deep down I knew better. The factory felt wrong, like it was watching me. The silence wasn't just emptiness, it was waiting. My skin prickled as I took a step back, my instincts screaming for me to leave. But before I could move, something shifted behind me. A chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp and jarring in the stillness. I turned slowly, dread curling in my stomach. One of the chairs at the table had moved. It had been tucked in before, but now it sat slightly pulled out, as if someone had just stood up. I backed toward the door, my breath shallow, my every nerve on edge. The factory had been abandoned for years, yet something unseen had made itself known. I had no intention of staying long enough to find out what. As I turned to leave, a soft click echoed through the room. The refrigerator door had swung open on its own, revealing rows of untouched food and drinks inside. My vision blurred as a chill ran through me. The expiration dates on the packages were from this year. I bolted from the room, my feet pounding against the factory floor. The air grew colder as I ran, shadows twisting at the edges of my vision. The machinery that had once stood lifeless now seemed to hum faintly, as if stirring from a long sleep. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, the exit feeling farther away than it should have been. My breath came in sharp gasps, my muscles burning with the effort of pushing forward. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. I stumbled to a halt, my heart hammering in my chest. The factory had returned to its unnatural silence, the oppressive stillness settling once more. I turned back, half expecting to see something standing in the darkness behind me, but there was nothing. The break room door was closed. I was certain I had left it open. I didn't wait to question it. I forced myself forward, my hands shaking as I finally reached the exit. The moment I stepped outside, the air shifted, warm and alive again. The factory loomed behind me, its rusted bones bathed in the fading light of the setting sun. I didn't look back as I made my way to my car, my mind still reeling from what I had seen. The factory was abandoned, lifeless, and yet someone or something had been expecting me. That night I dreamt of the break room. The chair scraping across the floor, the refrigerator door swinging open. The coffee still steaming, waiting just for me. But in the dream, I wasn't alone. A figure sat at the table, their face hidden in shadow. They reached for the coffee mug, their fingers wrapping around the handle. And as they lifted it to their lips, I saw the name on the side. It wasn't mine. It never had been. Story 17. The hospital loomed before me, its skeletal remains swallowed by ivy and time. Broken windows gaped like hollow eyes, the wind whispering through the cracks in the walls. The air smelled of decay and old disinfectant, a strange mix of rot and something sterile. As I stepped through the shattered entrance, the dust beneath my feet stirred like a ghost long forgotten. The hallways stretched endlessly, their floors littered with broken tiles and abandoned equipment. Rusted gurneys sat in corners, their wheels seized with age. Faded posters of outdated medical procedures clung desperately to the walls, their edges curling like dead leaves. The silence was heavy, thick enough to press against my skin like a warning. Rooms stood open, their doors hanging from broken hinges. Some held rusting bed frames, their mattresses stripped down to yellowed padding. Others contained shattered glass, old medical charts, and the remnants of a world that had simply ceased to exist. The deeper I wandered, the more the air felt wrong, thicker, colder, charged with something unseen. A flickering light ahead caught my attention. It came from a room at the end of the corridor, its doorway standing slightly ajar. My heartbeat quickened as I approached, drawn forward by something I couldn't name. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside and immediately froze. At the center of the room sat an old wooden crib, its paint peeling and frame warped with time. The sight of it sent a chill through me, its presence stark and unnatural in the dim light. The rest of the room was barren, the walls stripped down to crumbling plaster. There were no signs of life, no reason for the crib to be here. I stepped closer, my breath shallow. Inside the crib lay a small, neatly folded blanket, its fabric worn but clean. Something about it unsettled me, an eerie contrast to the decay surrounding it. Without thinking, I reached out and pressed my hand against it. My fingers sank into the fabric, and my blood ran cold. It was warm. Every hair on my body stood on end. The warmth suggested someone had been here, had placed the blanket there moments before I arrived. Yet, I had seen no one, heard nothing but the creak of the building settling. My pulse pounded in my ears as I backed away, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Then from the hallway, a soft creak echoed. The sound was slow, deliberate, like footsteps pressing against the old, rotting floorboards. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. The door remained open, revealing only the dark corridor beyond. Yet the feeling of being watched crept over me, thick and suffocating. I forced myself to move, stepping out into the hallway with careful, measured breaths. The air had grown colder, the dim light seeming to pulse around me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get out before something I couldn't understand made itself known. But something else, something deeper, told me I wasn't alone. A sound drifted through the air, soft and distant. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but as I strained to listen, it became clearer. A lullaby. The melody was slow, haunting, sung in a voice barely above a whisper. It carried through the hall like a breath, curling around me in a way that made my skin crawl. My hands trembled as I turned back to the room. The crib remained unchanged, the blanket still lying exactly as I had left it. But the warmth from before was gone, replaced by a chilling cold. My fingers ached from the sudden shift in temperature, as if whatever presence had been there had taken the warmth with it. The lullaby continued, growing fainter, as if the singer were moving away. I hesitated, caught between the primal need to flee and a curiosity that refused to let go. Taking a deep breath, I stepped further into the corridor, following the sound despite every warning in my mind. The hall twisted into darkness, each step heavier than the last. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, shifting in the dim light. The song faded into silence, and with it came an overwhelming stillness, as if the entire building were holding its breath. Then, a whisper. My name. It came from behind me, close enough that I felt the breath against my neck. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The hallway was empty, the air still, yet the sensation of something unseen pressed against me like a weight. My vision swam as the walls seemed to close in, the darkness stretching toward me like grasping hands. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My only thought was escape, to put as much distance between myself and whatever lingered in the hospital. My feet pounded against the floor as I sprinted toward the exit, the hallway warping around me, stretching impossibly long. The doorway appeared at last, a faint glow of daylight spilling through the cracks. I lunged forward, bursting into the open air with a gasp. The sky above was dull and gray, the wind howling through the skeletal remains of the building. I turned back, my pulse still hammering in my ears. The hospital stood silent, its dark windows empty and lifeless. Yet deep inside, I knew something still remained, watching from the shadows. My gaze drifted to the broken doorway, to the darkness beyond. And in that moment, I swore I saw movement, a slight shift, a glimpse of something retreating into the depths. I didn't stay to see more. My legs carried me away from that place, my mind reeling from what I had experienced. Even now, the memory lingers, the warmth of the blanket, the lullaby drifting through the halls, the whisper of my name in the dark. And somewhere in that crumbling hospital, a crib still waits, empty yet never truly abandoned. Story 18. The mansion stood in a clearing, its once grand facade now hidden beneath vines and decay. The windows were dark, some shattered, others covered in grime so thick they barely reflected the light. The front doors hung slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone to step inside. I hesitated, taking in the eerie silence, then pushed forward, curiosity winning over caution. Inside, dust clung to every surface, disturbed only by my footprints as I moved through the vast entryway. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dulled with age, swaying slightly as if touched by an unseen breeze. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic. A grand staircase loomed ahead, but something to my left caught my eye, an open door leading into a study. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents spilling onto the floor in disarray. A massive desk sat in the center, its surface cluttered with old papers and empty ink bottles. At the far end of the room, an antique record player rested on a low wooden table. Beside it, a crate of records lay untouched, their sleeves yellowed and brittle with time. I knelt, brushing the dust away from the topmost record. The cover was faded, the title barely legible. One by one, I flipped through the collection, names of forgotten artists and bands passing beneath my fingertips. Then, I froze. One record stood out, its label scratched and worn, but it wasn't the damage that made my stomach tighten. It was my name, etched roughly into the center. My breath caught as I traced the jagged letters with my fingertip. The handwriting was uneven, almost frantic, as if someone had carved it in haste. I turned the record over, searching for any other markings, but there was nothing. No song titles, no artist, just my name glaring back at me. My heart pounded as I glanced around the room, suddenly feeling exposed. I swallowed hard and placed the record on the player, my hands trembling as I lowered the needle. A moment of static crackled through the air, then a soft melody began to play. The tune was hauntingly familiar, yet I couldn't place where I had heard it before. A shiver ran down my spine as the music swelled, its notes twisting into something eerie, unnatural. Then a voice, low and distorted, speaking in a whisper just beneath the music. My name was spoken first, stretching unnaturally as if the record itself was breathing it. I lurched back, my pulse racing as the voice continued, murmuring words I couldn't fully understand. Some syllables sounded familiar, like fragments of memories I couldn't quite grasp. The air in the room grew colder, an unnatural stillness settling over me. I reached for the needle, desperate to silence the sound, but the record kept spinning. The whispering grew louder, words overlapping, filling my head with a rising sense of dread. My name repeated again, this time more forceful, almost a command. With a sharp motion, I yanked the needle from the vinyl. The music stopped instantly, leaving behind a heavy silence. My breath came in short gasps as I stared at the record, my mind racing with questions. How had my name ended up here? Who had made this? And more importantly, why? I grabbed the record and backed away from the table, my eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. The house had felt empty when I arrived, but now I wasn't so sure. The floorboards creaked, the air pressing in around me, thick with something unseen. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't just walk away without answers. I turned back to the crate, flipping through the remaining records with shaking hands. Most were ordinary, marked by age but otherwise unremarkable. But near the bottom, another record stood out. Its label was scratched beyond recognition, deep grooves cutting through the surface. It looked ruined, unplayable. Despite my fear, I lifted it carefully, inspecting its damaged surface. The groove seemed deliberate, as if someone had tried to erase whatever had been recorded. A faint chill crept along my spine as I turned it over, half expecting to see my name again. Instead, there was only a single word scrawled in ink: "Listen." My throat tightened, my grip on the record unsteady. Against every rational thought, I placed it onto the player and lowered the needle. The record spun, but no sound came at first, just a deep, unsettling crackle. Then, a voice. Not distorted this time, but clear. Familiar. My own voice, speaking in a trembling whisper. "If you find this, get out." I jerked away, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. The voice continued, urgent, fearful. "You don't have time. It knows you're here." A pause, then the sound of heavy breathing, like someone running. "Don't look behind you." A floorboard creaked behind me. Every muscle in my body locked, fear gripping me so tightly I could barely breathe. I couldn't turn. I couldn't move. The silence pressed against my ears, deafening in its weight. My heartbeat pounded in my throat, my skin prickling with the undeniable feeling of being watched. Then, something shifted in the reflection of the dusty glass cabinet ahead of me, a dark shape looming just behind my shoulder. I didn't think. I lunged forward, knocking over the record player as I bolted for the door. The music warped and twisted, a garbled mess of sound and static filling the room. I didn't stop to look back. My only thought was to get out, to put as much distance between me and whatever had been standing behind me. The hallway stretched ahead, the walls seeming to close in as I ran. The mansion groaned around me, the air thick with whispers that I couldn't escape. My name repeated again and again, overlapping in a chorus of voices. Bursting through the front doors, I stumbled into the overgrown yard, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark and unblinking. The whispers stopped the moment I crossed the threshold, as if the house itself had exhaled. I didn't stop running until the mansion was far behind me, its shadow swallowed by the trees. The record was still clutched in my hands, its surface ice cold despite the warmth of my grip. I wanted to throw it away, to rid myself of whatever had drawn me there. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Because somehow the mansion had known my name, and now it would never forget. Story 19. The entrance to the amusement park stood before me, its rusted gate slightly ajar. The sign overhead was faded, the once bright letters barely legible beneath years of grime. Vines had twisted through the metal, reclaiming the space nature had long since won. A strange hush lingered in the air, as if the place itself was holding its breath. I stepped inside, my footsteps crunching over debris and dried leaves. The remnants of food stands and ticket booths lined the path, their windows broken and paint peeling in long, curling strips. The scent of damp wood and rust filled my nostrils, mingling with something faintly sweet, like cotton candy left to rot. The deeper I moved into the park, the more unsettling the silence became. A carousel stood in the distance, its faded horses frozen mid-gallop. Their once joyful expressions had dulled, their glass eyes clouded with dust. The ride-striped canopy sagged under years of neglect, the poles corroded with rust. I ran my fingers over the chipped paint of a nearby horse, a sense of nostalgia mixing with unease. Beyond the carousel, the Ferris wheel towered against the darkening sky. Its skeletal frame loomed over the park, its once bright bulbs now shattered. The cabins hung motionless, suspended in eerie stillness. A cold breeze whispered through the metal, making the chains rattle softly, as if something unseen was shifting in the air. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning the control booth beside it. The glass was shattered, the levers inside covered in dust and cobwebs. There was no sign of life, no power, no movement, only the quiet hum of the wind. Yet, as I turned back to the Ferris wheel, a creaking noise broke the silence. The wheel groaned, the metal protesting as it lurched into motion. My breath caught as the cabins began to sway, their chains clanking against the framework. The slow, rhythmic turning sent a chill crawling down my spine. There was no one in the booth, no sign of any working machinery, yet the ride moved as if someone had just turned it on. I took a step back, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The Ferris wheel picked up speed, its cabin swaying more violently as it turned. The sound of grinding metal filled the air, drowning out the eerie silence of the park. I scanned the area, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but I was completely alone. A soft laugh echoed from somewhere near the ride, light and distant. The sound sent a shiver up my spine, my body tensing at the unnatural quality of it. It wasn't the joyful laugh of a child, it was hollow, stretched too thin, as if mimicking something it didn't quite understand. My hands clenched into fists as I forced myself to stay calm. The Ferris wheel slowed again, the cabins rocking slightly with the momentum. My heart pounded as I stared up at the topmost cart, my breath catching in my throat. A figure stood inside, silhouetted against the dimming sky. The shape was still, unmoving, watching me from above. I took an unsteady step back, my stomach twisting with dread. The figure didn't react, didn't shift or acknowledge me in any way. I blinked, and in that brief moment, it was gone. The cabin hung empty, swaying gently in the wind, as if it had never been occupied at all. A sharp click sounded from the control booth, followed by the slow whine of something powering down. The Ferris wheel ground to a halt, the metal groaning as the last cabin settled into place. My skin prickled as I turned to the booth, my breath coming in short bursts. The levers remained untouched, the dust undisturbed. The laughter came again, closer this time. It echoed between the rides, bouncing off the crumbling attractions with an eerie distortion. I spun around, my eyes darting between the carousel, the abandoned food stands, the empty pathways. There was no one there, yet I could feel something watching. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, disappearing behind the ticket booth. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but my curiosity pulled me forward. The booth was small, its wooden walls rotting with moisture. The glass was too dirty to see through, so I braced myself and peered inside. The booth was empty, but the dust on the counter had been disturbed. Faint outlines of fingers traced along the surface, as if someone had pressed their hands against it recently. My breath hitched, and a sudden gust of wind sent a chill through my bones. The air felt heavier, thick with something unseen. I turned sharply, ready to leave, but a movement near the Ferris wheel stopped me cold. One of the cabins, the very same one where I had seen the figure, was swaying unnaturally. The wind had died down, yet it rocked back and forth, the chains rattling softly. A whisper drifted through the air, barely audible but unmistakable. "Stay." The word was drawn out, almost playful, yet filled with something darker beneath the surface. My entire body tensed as I took a step back, my pulse racing. The park no longer felt empty, it felt inhabited, as if something had been waiting for me all along. Without another glance at the Ferris wheel, I turned and ran. My footsteps pounded against the cracked pavement, the decayed attractions blurring past me. The laughter followed, fading in and out, surrounding me from every direction. I didn't stop until I reached the rusted gates, pushing through them with shaking hands. Outside the park, the air was lighter, the oppressive weight lifting from my chest. I turned back once, my heart still hammering in my chest. The Ferris wheel stood motionless again, as if it had never moved. The park was silent, but I knew deep down that I hadn't been alone in there. As I walked away, something made me glance down at my hand. My fingers were covered in dust, smeared from where I had touched the ticket booth. But among the grime, something stood out, a single, fresh fingerprint that wasn't mine. Story 20. The school stood at the edge of town, long abandoned and forgotten. Its windows were broken, jagged shards of glass reflecting the dim light of the overcast sky. The doors hung slightly ajar, swaying with the wind, as if inviting me inside. A heavy silence lingered in the air, the kind that felt unnatural, almost forced. I stepped through the entrance, the floor creaking beneath my weight. Dust coated every surface, and the faint smell of mildew and rotting wood filled my lungs. Rows of lockers lined the hallway, their doors dented and rusted, some barely hanging onto their hinging. Faint footsteps echoed as I moved forward, though I was the only one there. The classrooms were in disarray, desks overturned, books scattered across the floor. Some pages had been torn out, their remnants curling in the corners of the room. Faded posters still clung to the walls, their messages of encouragement now eerie in the dim light. It felt as though time had stopped, trapping something unseen within these walls. I continued deeper into the school, my footsteps the only sound. The walls bore signs of decay, peeling paint revealing the layers beneath. Doors creaked on rusted hinges. I pushed them open, revealing more destruction. It felt like I was walking through a place that had been forgotten by time itself. One door stood slightly ajar at the end of the hallway, its wood splintered as though someone had forced it open. Inside, rows of desks faced a massive blackboard that stretched across the wall. The surface was covered in chalk scribbles, overlapping words and symbols in chaotic disorder. Among the mess, one message stood out, written in jagged, deliberate strokes. "I see you." The words sent a chill down my spine. The handwriting was fresh, untouched by dust, standing out starkly against the faded remnants of other writings. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, drawn to the message despite my growing unease. The air felt heavier now, thick with something I couldn't name. A gust of wind rattled the windows, making the old wooden frames groan. I glanced around, my eyes darting over the empty room, searching for any sign that someone had been here. The silence pressed in, almost suffocating, as if the school itself was holding its breath. The feeling of being watched crept over me, sending a prickling sensation across my skin. I reached out, dragging my fingers across the message, smearing the chalk slightly. The dust clung to my fingertips, tangible proof that the words were real. A sudden noise echoed from the hallway, a faint scraping sound, as though something was moving just beyond the door. My heart pounded as I turned, straining to hear. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. I took a cautious step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. The atmosphere had shifted, the air charged with something unseen. The blackboard loomed behind me, the words lingering in my mind. I forced myself to move, inching toward the door with slow, careful steps. Just as I reached the threshold, the sound came again, louder this time. It was closer, just outside the door. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, listening. A slow, deliberate knock echoed through the room, followed by another. It was not the sound of wood against wood, but something else, something unnatural. Summoning my courage, I pushed the door open, my body tensed for movement. The hallway stretched before me, empty and still. The lockers stood in silent rows, their doors unmoving. Yet the sense of being watched had intensified, pressing against me from all sides. A faint scrawling noise reached my ears, the unmistakable sound of chalk scraping against a board. My stomach dropped as I turned back toward the classroom, dread coiling in my chest. The blackboard had changed. New words had been added beneath the first message, written in the same jagged strokes. "You shouldn't be here." The words burned into my mind, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The chalk lay on the floor beneath the board, as though it had been dropped only moments ago. My hands trembled as I stepped backward, unwilling to turn my back on the room. The air had turned frigid, my breath visible in the dim light. The classroom door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. Panic surged through me as I reached for the handle, yanking it open with all my strength. The hallway beyond seemed darker now, the shadows stretching unnaturally. I forced myself forward, my legs unsteady as I moved toward the exit. With every step, the sensation of being followed grew stronger. Faint whispers echoed in the empty corridor, too soft to understand, but unmistakably there. My heart pounded as I reached the main entrance, my hands fumbling with the door. It groaned as it swung open, revealing the dull gray sky beyond. I stumbled outside, the cold air hitting me like a shock. The whispers faded the moment I crossed the threshold, leaving only the wind howling through the broken windows. I turned back, expecting to see movement within the darkened hallways, but there was nothing. The school stood as it had before, silent and abandoned. My pulse still raced as I stepped away, my hands gripping my arms to steady myself. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against something unfamiliar. My breath caught as I pulled it out, a piece of chalk, coated in dust. My hands trembled as I stared at it, the implications sinking in. The wind picked up, rustling the overgrown grass around the building. The school remained still, as though it had never held any presence within. Yet the weight of unseen eyes lingered, watching, waiting. The message on the blackboard burned in my mind, an unshakable warning. I turned away, forcing my feet to move, determined to leave this place behind. But as I walked, the whispers returned, softer this time, threading through the wind. A final glance over my shoulder sent a chill down my spine. The blackboard, just visible through the broken window, bore one last message. "See you soon." Story 21. The firehouse stood at the end of a forgotten road, its brick exterior weathered and crumbling. The tall garage doors were rusted at the hinges, their once bright red paint peeling in long, curling strips. A broken sign above the entrance swayed in the wind, the faded letters barely legible. The whole place felt abandoned, like no one had stepped foot inside for years. Yet, as I moved closer, something caught my eye. Fresh tire tracks led through the dust-covered pavement, their deep imprints cutting sharply against the otherwise untouched ground. They disappeared beneath the large garage door, the marks too crisp to be more than a day old. A strange unease settled in my chest as I followed the tracks, stopping just before the door. I reached out, running my fingers along the rusted metal. It was ice cold despite the warmth of the evening air. I hesitated before gripping the handle and giving it a tug. It shouldn't have budged, but the moment my fingers curled around it, the door clicked softly and creaked open on its own. The air inside was thick with the scent of oil and smoke, but beneath it was something else. Something stale, something wrong. I stepped forward, my boots scuffing against the concrete floor. Rows of empty lockers lined the far wall, their doors ajar like gaping mouths. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, its dim glow barely reaching the far corners of the space. In the center of the garage sat an old fire truck, its red paint dulled by time. The tires were caked with mud, the fresh tracks leading straight to where it rested. Dust should have settled over the surface, but it was strangely clean, as if someone had recently wiped it down. My pulse quickened as I moved closer, the silence pressing against my ears. The truck's door was slightly open, a sliver of darkness visible through the gap. I hesitated before placing my hand on the handle, my breath shallow. The leather-wrapped grip was warm, as though someone had just been sitting inside. The thought sent a chill up my spine, but I pulled the door open anyway. The interior was pristine, untouched by dust or decay. The dashboard lights flickered faintly, casting an eerie glow over the cracked leather seats. A radio sat in its usual place, but when I looked closer, I realized something unsettling. The display wasn't dark and dead like I expected, it was still on. A faint crackling noise filtered through the speakers, followed by static-filled whispers. My fingers hovered over the dials, uncertain if I should turn it off. The longer I listened, the clearer the whispers became. They weren't just random noise. They were words. "Help us." The voice was distant, barely above her breath. Then another whisper followed, more urgent this time. "Still burning, can't get out." My throat tightened as I stepped away from the truck, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The whispers didn't stop. They layered over each other, pleading, desperate. The words repeated like a broken transmission, the urgency growing stronger. I turned, scanning the garage. A dark hallway led deeper into the firehouse, the shadows pressing thickly against the dim light. A sudden chill filled the space, and I swore I heard footsteps echoing in the distance. I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move forward. The hallway smelled of damp concrete and something acrid, something burnt. Old equipment lay scattered along the floor, abandoned as if the crew had left in a hurry. My fingers brushed against a locker as I passed, the cold metal sending a jolt through me. The locker door swung open on its own, revealing a neatly folded fireman's uniform. A name tag glinted faintly in the dim light. My stomach clenched as I leaned in to read it. It was my last name. My pulse roared in my ears as I stumbled back. My breathing grew shallow, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. I had no connection to this place. I had never been here before. And yet my name was stitched into the fabric, as if it had always belonged to me. A metallic clang echoed from the garage, making me whirl around. The sound was sharp, deliberate. My footsteps were unsteady as I made my way back, my nerves thrumming with unease. As I reached the garage doors, my stomach dropped. The fire truck's headlights were on. Their beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust swirling in the air. The radio continued its soft, crackling whispers, but something had changed. The voices were louder now, more frantic. "We never left," one voice hissed, and then another. "We still burn." The truck's engine rumbled to life with a deep, guttural growl. Exhaust billowed from the back, the acrid scent filling my lungs. I staggered backward, my instincts screaming at me to run. But before I could move, the driver's door swung open. A figure sat in the seat, barely visible through the haze of dust and smoke. Their silhouette was rigid, unmoving, but I could feel their gaze locked onto me. The air around me turned suffocating, heat radiating from the truck in waves. My skin prickled as the temperature rose, sweat beading along my brow. The figure tilted its head slowly, its movements unnatural, deliberate. Then, in a voice that scraped against my skull, it whispered, "You were supposed to be here." My breath hitched as the truck lurched forward an inch. The tires squealed against the concrete, the sound piercing in the enclosed space. The headlights flared brighter, nearly blinding me. I turned, sprinting toward the exit, my legs burning with each desperate step. The firehouse seemed to stretch endlessly as I ran, the hallway warping around me. The whispers followed, their voices layered in a chaotic symphony of sorrow and rage. The air grew thick with smoke, filling my lungs with each panicked breath. I reached the front entrance, shoving the heavy doors open. The cool night air rushed in, colliding against the unbearable heat behind me. I stumbled into the street, coughing as I looked back. The firehouse stood silent, the garage doors now tightly shut. No lights, no whispers, no fire truck waiting in the dark. The fresh tire tracks had vanished, the dust undisturbed once more. But the last thing I saw before I turned to leave made my blood run cold. A faint glow flickered behind the broken windows like flames licking hungrily at the glass. And in the darkness, beyond the fire-lit haze, I saw them. Figures in soot-covered uniforms, still burning, still waiting. Story 22. The mansion stood at the edge of the forest, its structure barely holding against the weight of time. Ivy twisted around its crumbling pillars, and the windows were clouded with grime. The air smelled of damp wood and decay, a sharp contrast to the beauty the house must have once held. The front door was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the grand foyer. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by my presence as I moved further in. The walls were lined with ornate wallpaper, peeling in places to reveal the wood beneath. Despite the emptiness, I felt as though I was being watched. The floor creaked beneath me as I wandered through the dimly lit halls. Faint light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting distorted shapes along the floor. Furniture sat draped in white sheets, resembling the silhouettes of people frozen in time. A grand staircase loomed ahead, splitting off into darkness on either side. As I walked past the sitting room, something caught my eye. Along the walls hung a series of old paintings, their frames covered in dust. The first depicted the mansion in its prime, its gardens lush and well-kept. The second showed a family standing on the front steps, their faces blurred with age. I moved down the line, my breath growing shallow as the paintings changed. The colors darkened, the subjects shifting from warm scenes to something unsettling. One showed the mansion's windows, all but one covered in thick curtains. The uncovered window revealed a dark figure standing inside, its features obscured. My pulse quickened as I approached the final painting. The colors were darker, the details sharper than the rest. It depicted the hallway I had just walked through, painted from the exact angle of the room's entrance. A figure stood in the shadows, positioned exactly where I had been moments before. A chill ran down my spine as I took a step back. The paint looked fresh, the brushstrokes crisp and defined. The figure's head was slightly tilted, as if observing something observing me. My breath caught as I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. The hallway was empty, but the air had changed. The silence pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating. My skin prickled as I turned back to the painting, my fingers itching to touch the surface. The moment I did, a soft creak echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. I swallowed hard. forcing myself to stay calm. The noise could have been the house settling, or perhaps an animal seeking shelter within the decayed walls. Yet every nerve in my body screamed that I was not alone. The feeling of being watched grew heavier, pressing down like an unseen weight. I backed away from the paintings, my gaze darting toward the grand staircase. Shadows stretched along the steps, shifting slightly as the dim light flickered. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the mind, but doubt clawed at my thoughts. I needed to leave. As I turned toward the entrance, the air behind me shifted. A cold breath of wind brushed against my neck, sending ice through my veins. My steps quickened, the mansion seeming to stretch longer, the exit farther than before. Every instinct told me to run, but my body felt sluggish, as though something unseen held me back. A whisper broke through the silence, soft and distant. It came from the hallway where the paintings hung, curling around the edges of my mind. My stomach twisted as I fought the urge to turn back. The presence I had felt since stepping inside was no longer subtle, it was there, waiting, just beyond sight. I reached the entrance and grabbed the door handle, my fingers trembling against the cold metal. It wouldn't budge. The wood groaned under my grip as I yanked harder, my breath coming in short gasps. A chill spread through the air, seeping into my skin, filling my lungs. The whispering grew louder, no longer distant, but just behind me. My chest tightened as I squeezed my eyes shut, unwilling to see what stood there. A sharp creak came from the floor, too close, too real. Something was in the room with me. I forced myself to turn, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway was empty, yet the last painting had changed. The figure had moved closer, now standing just beyond the threshold of the room. My vision blurred as I stumbled back, panic clawing at my mind. The door finally gave way, nearly sending me tumbling onto the porch. I gasped for air as I stumbled outside, the daylight feeling foreign against my skin. The mansion loomed behind me, silent once more, its doors slightly ajar as though nothing had changed. I forced myself to take another step, my body still trembling. As I glanced back one final time, my blood ran cold. The last painting, the one that had haunted me inside, now hung on the wall beside the entrance. The figure had stepped fully into the room, its head tilted, still watching. Story 23. The mall had been abandoned for years, its once vibrant halls now draped in silence. Broken skylights let in slivers of pale light, illuminating the dust that hung heavy in the air. The storefronts stood empty, their glass shattered or coated in grime, remnants of past sales barely visible through peeling decals. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the main corridor, passing stores that had long been stripped of their merchandise. A few overturned mannequins lay scattered on the tiled floor, their blank faces staring up at the ceiling. The air smelled of decay and mold, a reminder that this place had been left to rot. I turned a corner and spotted something strange, a store that looked completely untouched. Its glass windows were clean, its signs still intact, glowing faintly under flickering fluorescent lights. Unlike the others, its interior was stocked with pristine clothing, electronics, and shelves neatly arranged as if still awaiting customers. Cautiously, I stepped inside, half expecting the illusion to shatter. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of new fabric, untouched by the dust and mildew outside. Racks of clothes stood in perfect order, displays carefully arranged, as if employees had just stepped away moments ago. My gaze drifted to a table stacked with neatly folded sweaters. The price tags fluttered slightly in the breeze from a still working air vent. I reached for one, my fingers trembling as I flipped it over, my stomach tightening at what I saw. My name was printed in bold letters where the price should have been. Every tag bore the same unsettling message, as if the store had been expecting me. I backed away, my heart pounding as I checked another item, a watch, sleek and polished, with a tag that also carried my name. I moved from aisle to aisle, pulling at different tags, hoping to find something different. Every single one was the same, my name staring back at me in crisp black ink. It was impossible, but there it was, written over and over again, as if I was the only customer who had ever existed. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed to grow louder, filling the empty space with a steady buzz. The store felt alive in a way that sent a cold shiver down my spine, as though it had been waiting for me all along. My reflection in the glass of a display case looked pale, uncertain, caught in a place that didn't make sense. A sound broke the silence, a faint rustling, like fabric shifting on a rack. My breath caught as I turned toward the source, my eyes scanning the aisles. Nothing had moved, but the sensation of being watched pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. I swallowed hard and stepped back toward the entrance, the need to leave clawing at my chest. As I reached for the door, the overhead lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows along the floor. The glass vibrated slightly under my fingertips, as though resisting my touch. A soft chime echoed through the store, the kind that signaled a customer entering. But I was the only one there, and I hadn't moved. My skin prickled as I turned, my gaze landing on the register at the back of the store, where a small screen flickered to life. It displayed a message in simple, blinking text. "Thank you for shopping with us. Your total is due." My throat tightened as I took a shaky step backward, my mind racing. I hadn't taken anything, hadn't even touched most of the items, so what was I being charged for? A receipt printed itself from the machine, curling onto the counter. I forced myself to move closer, dread pooling in my stomach as I reached for the slip. The list was impossibly long, detailing purchases I had never made, clothes, appliances, things I had never owned. At the bottom of the receipt, in large, bold letters, was a single line: "Final payment required. Yourself." The moment I read it, the overhead lights flickered violently, the store seeming to shudder around me. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest like unseen hands urging me to stay. Panic surged through me as I turned and bolted toward the exit. The glass doors refused to budge, their hinges locked in place despite having opened so easily before. My reflection stared back at me, but something was off. My eyes in the glass were darker, hollow, not quite my own. A whisper brushed against my ear, low and distorted, as if spoken through a radio full of static. The racks of clothing trembled, the shelves rattling as if the store itself was protesting my attempt to leave. The receipt in my hand burned against my skin, as though demanding to be acknowledged. I pounded against the glass, desperate for a way out. The buzzing from the lights grew into a deafening hum, the once silent store now filled with an invisible energy that made my skin crawl. My breath came in ragged gasps as I turned back, the aisles stretching impossibly long, the exit now seeming miles away. Shadows moved in the periphery of my vision, shapes shifting between the racks of clothing. My pulse hammered as I saw glimpses of figures, mannequins that had not been there before, their heads slowly turning toward me. Their hands twitched, fingers curling as they began to step forward. The register chimed again, a sickly sweet voice playing from the speakers above. "Payment is due. You cannot leave without settling your total." The mannequins moved faster now, their plastic limbs jerking unnaturally as they closed in. With a final, desperate effort, I threw myself against the doors, my shoulders slamming hard against the glass. It didn't shatter, but something gave way. The pressure lifted, and suddenly I was falling. Cold air rushed around me as I hit the tiled floor of the mall outside. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering as I turned to look back. The store was gone. Where the untouched shop had stood, there was now only a collapsed storefront, filled with debris and broken glass. No lights, no merchandise, no mannequins. The receipt was still in my hand, the ink now faded, as though it had been printed years ago. My name remained at the bottom, the words "final payment required" barely visible beneath smudged ink. I let it slip from my fingers, watching as the wind carried it away. Without another look back, I turned and left the mall, my footsteps quick against the cracked tiles. The feeling of unseen eyes never faded, even as I stepped into the open air. Somewhere in the distance, a chime echoed a door opening for a customer that should never have been there. Story 24. The church stood alone on the outskirts of town, its once proud steeple leaning slightly with age. The stone walls were cracked, ivy creeping up their sides as if nature was reclaiming the place. The wooden doors, though weathered, remained shut as if guarding something inside. A strange sense of unease crept over me as I stepped toward the entrance. Pushing the doors open, I was met with a thick, musty air that smelled of damp wood and decay. The interior was dark, the only light filtering through the stained glass windows, casting distorted colors along the floor. Dust swirled in the dim light, disturbed by my movement. The silence inside was overwhelming, heavy with something I couldn't name. I walked further in, my footsteps echoing against the stone walls. The pews stretched in neat rows on either side of the aisle, untouched by time. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I noticed them. The pews were not empty. Figures sat in the seats, their faces pale and expressionless. Their clothes were tattered, blending into the aged wood around them. They didn't move, didn't react to my presence, but their hollow eyes stared forward, unseen yet aware. A chill ran down my spine as I hesitated, my breathing suddenly too loud in the stillness. I took a step closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. The figures remained motionless, their faces frozen in eerie silence. Their skin looked waxy, almost unnatural, like statues carved from something not quite human. My fingers trembled as I reached out toward the nearest one. The second my hand got close, the figure shifted ever so slightly. Not a movement of life, but something else, a subtle tilt, a barely perceptible turn of the head. I jerked back, my chest tightening as my breath caught in my throat. The air in the church felt colder, the stillness pressing against my skin. I forced myself to step forward again, my eyes darting across the rows. Every single seat was filled with those same vacant faces, their expressions unchanged. My stomach twisted as I noticed something else. The dust that coated the church's floor was undisturbed. No footprints, no signs that anyone had entered or exited. The realization sent a wave of dread washing over me. If no one had walked in, how long had they been sitting there? My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I turned toward the altar, hoping for some kind of explanation. A massive wooden cross hung above it, casting a long shadow across the sanctuary. Beneath it, a pulpit stood, untouched by time. Then, the silence broke. A faint creaking echoed through the space, the sound of shifting wood. I spun around, my breath catching. The figures in the pews hadn't moved, yet the air felt different, charged, like something unseen was stirring. The stained glass windows darkened as if the outside light was fading. I stepped backward, my body screaming at me to leave, but something held me in place. My gaze darted to the altar, where an old, leather-bound book lay open. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but a single phrase stood out, written over and over in jagged script. They see you. It's you. My hands clenched at my sides, my skin prickling with an unshakable sense of being watched. The figures remained frozen, but the space between them felt wrong, like something invisible moved through the rows, weaving between them. A whisper of movement stirred the air, though no one had spoken. I took a step back, my foot scuffing against the stone floor. The second the sound echoed, something shifted. The figures, all at once, turned their heads toward me. Not slow, not natural instant, as if they had never been still to begin with. A sharp, cold fear shot through me. Their empty eyes bore into mine, their faces unchanged yet filled with something terrible. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps as I fought the overwhelming urge to run. The pulpit, the book, the cross above it all felt like a trap, like I had stepped into something I was never meant to see. Then, the pews creaked again. The figures began to rise, one by one, their movements eerily synchronized. No sound came from them, no breathing, no shuffling, just the sound of wood groaning under their weight. My legs finally obeyed, and I turned, bolting toward the doors. The air behind me felt heavy, pressing in, as if the figures were closing the distance. My fingers fumbled at the massive wooden doors, my pulse hammering as I shoved against them. They wouldn't budge. The handles felt ice cold beneath my grip, unmoving, locked from the inside. A sound low and guttural filled the space behind me. A whispering that wasn't words but something older, deeper, seeping into my bones. I spun around, pressing my back against the door, my breath ragged. The figures stood in the aisle now, blocking my escape. Their faces had changed. No longer blank, they twisted into grotesque squiles, stretched too wide, teeth too sharp. Their hollow eyes gleamed, reflecting the dim light from the windows. My hands clawed at the door, panic flooding my veins. A deep, resonant noise filled the church, vibrating through the walls. It was not a bell, but something older, something alive. The figures stepped closer, their movements smooth, unnatural. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Then, the door gave way. I fell backward, hitting the cold earth outside. The air was sharp, biting, free of the suffocating weight inside. Scrambling to my feet, I turned to look at the church. The door stood open, revealing only empty pews. No figures, no faces. The sanctuary was silent. I backed away, my heart still racing, my skin crawling with something unseen. The air around the church remained still, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something watched me from within. I turned and walked away, refusing to look back. As I reached the road, the wind picked up, carrying a faint sound through the air. A creaking, the whisper of shifting wood. The sound of pews filling once more. Story 25. The school stood at the end of a forgotten road, its walls crumbling and windows shattered. Vines crept up the brick exterior, winding through the cracks like veins feeding a lifeless body. The front doors were missing, leaving only a gaping entrance into darkness. A stale, earthy scent filled the air, a mixture of rot and damp wood. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Desks lay overturned, their rusted legs jutting out at odd angles. A faded bulletin board hung lopsided, its papers curling with age. The ceiling sagged in places, the remnants of fallen tiles crunching beneath my boots. Dust swirled in the beams of light filtering through broken windows. Lockers lined the walls, their doors hanging open like gaping mouths. Faint graffiti marked the metal, faded words and symbols whose meanings had long been lost. A draft moved through the hallway, carrying the whisper of something unseen. I turned a corner and found a classroom with its door half open. Inside, rows of wooden desks sat eerily intact, as if waiting for students who would never return. The blackboard was smeared with chalk dust, the remnants of long-forgotten lessons lingering in the air. A breeze stirred the curtains of an open window, the fabric shifting like something breathing. I took a cautious step forward, drawn to the strange stillness of the room. The wooden floor groaned beneath me, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. Papers littered the teacher's desk, yellowed and brittle with time. The faint scent of mildew clung to the walls, mixing with the cold air drifting in from outside. A movement caught my eye beyond the window. A figure stood just beyond the glass, partially obscured by the glare of the setting sun. They were tall and unmoving, their posture rigid as they raised an arm and motioned toward me. The gesture was slow, deliberate, beckoning me forward. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer to the window, squinting against the fading light. The figure stood at the edge of the schoolyard, where the pavement met the overgrown grass. Their features were hidden in shadow, but their presence felt undeniable, heavy against the twilight. The wind picked up, rattling the window pane as if urging me to make a choice. I hesitated, my breath shallow as I studied the figure. Something about them felt both familiar and foreign, as though I had seen them before but couldn't recall where. The air in the classroom felt thick now, pressing against me, nudging me toward the window. My fingers hovered over the sill, the chipped paint rough beneath my skin. The figure motioned again, their movement fluid yet unnatural. My stomach twisted, a deep instinct warning me against stepping outside. Yet an unshakable pull urged me forward, a quiet whisper in my mind telling me I had to follow. I swallowed hard, gripping the window frame, feeling the cool glass beneath my fingertips. The wind howled as I climbed onto the windowsill, my body tense with uncertainty. The figure remained still, waiting with impossible patience. The last of the sunlight cast long shadows across the schoolyard, stretching toward me like grasping hands. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the distant rustling of the trees. I lowered myself onto the cracked pavement, my knees unsteady as I landed. The air outside was colder than before, the scent of damp earth filling my lungs. The figure turned without a sound and walked toward the overgrown field beyond the schoolyard. Their steps left no trace on the ground, their movements too smooth, too precise. I followed, my body moving before my mind could protest. The grass swallowed the remnants of the sidewalk, tall and unkempt, brushing against my legs. The figure never looked back, their presence an anchor pulling me deeper into the unknown. The further we went, the quieter the world became, as if everything was holding its breath. A clearing emerged ahead, the trees arching overhead to form a natural corridor. The figure stopped at the center, standing beneath the dying glow of the sky. Their head tilted slightly, as though listening to something I couldn't hear. A strange hum vibrated through the air, faint but growing stronger. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt tight, my breath short and uneven. The figure slowly turned to face me, and for the first time I saw their face. It was mine. Every detail was identical: the shape of the jaw, the curve of the brow, even the small scar above the left eyebrow. But their expression was empty, devoid of emotion, as if they were only wearing my face, not living in it. Their lips parted, and a whisper slipped through the air, but I couldn't understand the words. A deep sense of wrongness flooded my chest, my instincts screaming at me to run. The figure took a step closer, their eyes locked onto mine with a knowing gaze. My feet refused to move, as if the ground itself had trapped me in place. The whisper grew louder, curling around my mind like fingers pressing against my skull. The sky darkened unnaturally, the air thickening with something unseen. The trees loomed taller, their shadows stretching toward me, reaching, waiting. The figure lifted their hand again, not beckoning this time, but pointing. My body tensed as I followed their gesture, my gaze shifting toward the distant edge of the clearing. A doorway stood there, freestanding and impossibly out of place. Its wooden frame was weathered, the paint peeling, the knob gleaming like polished bone. It led to nowhere, suspended in the middle of the field like a forgotten relic. The whisper in my mind pushed harder, urging me toward it. My hands clenched into fists, my pulse erratic as I struggled against the invisible pull. The figure stepped aside, giving me a clear path to the door. Their expression remained unreadable, their presence unwavering. The hum in the air grew louder, resonating deep in my bones, demanding I make a choice. I took a step back, my body trembling. The figure did not react, only watching as if waiting for me to understand something I couldn't grasp. The clearing pulsed around me, the trees shifting, the shadows deepening. The doorway remained, a silent invitation to something unknown. I turned and ran, my heart hammering against my ribs. The wind roared as I sprinted back toward the school, the world twisting around me. The grass clawed at my legs, the air pressing against me like unseen hands trying to hold me back. I didn't dare look over my shoulder, didn't want to see if the figure was following. The school loomed ahead, its broken windows gleaming under the moonlight. I stumbled through the open doorway, my breath ragged and my body shaking. The air inside was heavy, filled with the echoes of something ancient and waiting. The classroom remained as I had left it, the window open, the curtain swaying gently. But the outside was empty now, no figure, no doorway. Only the quiet of the abandoned school and the lingering whisper of something unseen. Story 26. The mansion loomed at the edge of town, its windows dark and lifeless. Vines crept along the cracked stone walls, twisting around shattered glass and rotting wood. The front door hung slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone to enter. The wind howled through the broken eaves, whispering secrets long forgotten. Inside, dust coated everything in a thick, undisturbed layer. The air smelled of decay and damp wood, the scent of time swallowing the mansion whole. Faded portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring with hollow eyes. A grand staircase stretched upward, its steps worn and groaning beneath my weight. Each room I passed held remnants of a life abandoned. A parlor filled with tattered furniture, a dining room with an untouched table set for guests who never arrived. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and unnatural. It was as if the house was waiting for something. In the hallway beyond the dining room, I found a door leading downward. The basement. A wave of cold air seeped through the cracks, carrying the scent of earth and something metallic. I hesitated before gripping the handle, its rusted surface biting into my palm. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step swallowed by the darkness below. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, the air thick and damp. My flashlight flickered as I swept it across the stone walls, revealing shelves filled with old books and crates covered in cobwebs. Then I saw the door. It was different from the others in the house, heavy, reinforced and locked with a thick iron latch. The wood was dark, nearly black, and carved with symbols I didn't recognize. I ran my fingers over the surface, feeling deep grooves worn smooth by time. Something about it unsettled me, but curiosity pushed me forward. I searched the room, brushing aside dust and debris until I found a key resting atop a rotting crate. It was cold to the touch, heavier than it looked. Without thinking, I slid it into the lock and turned. The latch clicked open. The door groaned as it swung inward, revealing a small, windowless chamber. The walls were bare stone, the floor covered in a thick layer of dust. A single object stood in the center, a large, ornate mirror. Its frame was gilded but tarnished, intricate patterns curling like ivy along the edges. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. The glass was clean, untouched by dust or time, but the reflection staring back at me was wrong. It wasn't me. The figure in the mirror wore my clothes, stood at the same angle, and mimicked my every move. But their face was different. Their eyes were darker, their expression twisted in something between curiosity and malice. My heart pounded as I lifted a hand, watching as they did the same. I leaned in, searching for any imperfection, any sign that it was just a trick of the glass. But the longer I stared, the more I realized this thing wasn't just copying me. It was watching me, studying me. A cold chill crept up my spine as the figure in the mirror tilted its head slightly, just a fraction off from my own movement. My pulse thundered in my ears as I took a step back, but the reflection didn't. It stayed where it was, its dark eyes locked onto mine. I turned away, my stomach twisting, but a faint sound made me freeze. A whisper. It was soft, nearly lost beneath the weight of the silence, but it came from the mirror. "My name." I whipped around, my flashlight trembling in my grasp. The reflection was grinning now, its lips curled in a way that didn't match my own. My throat tightened as I watched it lift a hand slowly, deliberately, and press its palm against the glass. Something inside me screamed to run, but my legs refused to move. The mirror was wrong, unnatural, something that should not exist. My own reflection should not be grinning when I wasn't. It should not be moving when I was standing still. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Let me out." My breath caught as the glass shimmered, rippling like water. My reflection leaned closer, pressing against the surface as if testing it. My own body felt heavy, as though something unseen was pulling at me, urging me to step forward. I fought against the feeling, forcing myself to back away. The reflection's grin faltered, its eyes narrowing. The whisper became a low hum, vibrating in my bones. The air grew thick, pressing against me like unseen hands. Then, with a sharp crack, a fracture split across the mirror. The reflection's expression twisted into something furious, its lips moving in silent protest. Another crack splintered across the glass, then another, webbing outward like veins. The whisper turned into a wail, a sound that sent ice through my veins. I bolted. I didn't look back as I stumbled out of the room, slamming the heavy door shut behind me. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the lock, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The moment the latch clicked into place, the wailing stopped. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. I backed away, my chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. The house felt different now, heavier, as though it was pressing in on me, urging me to leave. My mind screamed at me to listen. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart hammering against my ribs. The moment I reached the first floor, a sharp gust of wind slammed the front door open. The house was done with me. It wanted me gone. I didn't hesitate. The night air was sharp against my skin as I stumbled outside, my legs weak beneath me. The mansion stood silent behind me, its windows dark, its presence looming. I could still feel the weight of the mirror's reflection in my mind, its dark eyes watching, waiting. I never went back. But sometimes in the dead of night, I hear my name whispered from the shadows. And when I look into a mirror, for just a fraction of a second, I see something else staring back. Story 27. The amusement park had been abandoned for years, its skeletal remains standing against the wind like a forgotten monument. Rusted rides groaned in the breeze, their once bright colors now faded and peeling. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, its carriages swaying slightly as if still waiting for passengers who would never return. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, rust, and something faintly sweet, like old candy left to rot. I stepped carefully over cracked pavement, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The game booths stood in a silent row, their prizes long since stolen or decayed. A stuffed bear, missing an eye, lay in a puddle near a broken popcorn machine. The wind carried a distant creak, the sound of something shifting, but I saw no movement. The funhouse stood near the heart of the park, its entrance gaping like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. The paint had peeled away, revealing the rotting wood beneath, and the sign above swayed precariously. The door hung slightly open, as if waiting for me to step inside. Something about it made my stomach twist, but I pushed forward. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew. My footsteps were muffled against the warped wooden floor, each step causing a soft creak. The walls were lined with mirrors, their surfaces cracked and clouded with age. Some were shattered completely, jagged shards glinting in the dim light filtering through the broken ceiling. As I moved deeper, my reflection followed, distorted by the fractured glass. Some mirrors stretched me into an unnatural thinness, while others made my limbs bend at impossible angles. I kept walking, drawn further, and despite the unease curling in my chest. The air seemed heavier here, pressing against my skin. Then I saw it. In the largest mirror, just behind my reflection, a shadow moved. It was tall, its form blurred and shifting, like smoke trapped beneath glass. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but the space behind me was empty. My reflection stared back at me, but the shadow was gone. A chill ran down my spine as I turned back to the mirror. My reflection remained still, but something was wrong. The glass around it spiderwebbed with new cracks, stretching outward like veins. My heart pounded as I reached out, my fingers hovering just above the surface. The cold radiating from the glass was unnatural, seeping into my skin. Then, my reflection moved, but I hadn't. A slow, unnatural grin spread across its face, twisting its features into something unfamiliar. My stomach clenched as my own face stared back at me with an expression I wasn't making. The shadow loomed behind it again, growing larger, its edges writhing like it was alive. The lights overhead flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the floor. The air thickened, carrying a whisper so faint I couldn't make out the words. My breath came fast and shallow as I took a step back, but my reflection remained unmoving, still grinning. The shadow behind it reached forward, its long claw-like fingers stretching toward me. The mirror cracked further, a deep, splintering sound filling the room. My body tensed as the whispering grew louder, overlapping voices merging into an eerie, distorted hum. The reflection tilted its head, eyes wide and unblinking, lips curling as if amused. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I turned on my heel, bolting for the exit. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly as the flickering light cast my shadow against the walls. The whispers followed me, echoing in the tight space, rising in urgency. My lungs burned as I ran, the door ahead seeming farther away with every step. The mirrors lining the hall warped my reflection, each one showing a twisted version of me, their eyes dark and hollow. A hand brushed against my shoulder. I let out a sharp cry, shoving forward as the air behind me grew impossibly cold. The door was within reach now, just a few more steps. My fingers grasped the edge, yanking it open, and I stumbled out into the daylight. The air outside hit me like a wave, warm and thick compared to the frigid, suffocating chill inside. I spun around, my chest heaving, but the funhouse stood as it had before, silent, still, unchanged. The doorway gaped, its darkness unwavering, showing nothing but the empty corridor beyond. The whispers had stopped. The mirrors reflected only dust and decay. I backed away, my heart still pounding. The amusement park stretched before me, its rusted rides swaying in the breeze, the eerie stillness pressing down like a weight. The sky above had dimmed, the sun hidden behind thick, gray clouds. My fingers trembled as I wiped sweat from my brow, my skin still icy from whatever had been in that room. As I turned to leave, my gaze caught something in one of the broken mirrors just outside the funhouse. It was faint, barely visible in the fractured glass. A figure, tall, shadowy, standing at the entrance, watching. I didn't wait to see if it would follow. Story 28. The entrance to the zoo was barely visible beneath the tangle of vines and overgrowth. Rusted gates stood half open, their metal bars twisted and worn from years of neglect. The sign above them was cracked and faded, the name of the zoo barely legible beneath layers of peeling paint. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a reminder that nature had long since reclaimed this place. Stepping inside, I found the pathways littered with broken branches and fallen leaves. Crumbling enclosures lined the walkway, their signs weathered and unreadable. Some cages stood empty, their bars rusted through, while others remained eerily intact. Faint echoes of animals long gone seemed to linger in the silence, a ghostly presence in the abandoned space. As I wandered deeper, a strange sensation settled over me, a quiet unease I couldn't shake. The wind carried whispers through the trees, rustling the branches like unseen hands brushing against them. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the cracked pavement, twisting with every shift of the fading light. It felt as if the zoo itself was watching, waiting. I turned a corner and froze. Ahead of me stood a cage, larger than the others, its bars blackened with rust but still unbroken. The air around it felt different, heavier, charged with something unseen. As I stepped closer, my breath caught in my throat. Inside the cage, a figure stood perfectly still, its form barely illuminated by the dim light filtering through the trees. Its shape was human but wrong. Too tall, too thin, its limbs stretched unnaturally as if pulled beyond their limits. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, clinging tightly to sharp bones beneath. Long fingers curled around the bars, the knuckles unnervingly prominent. But it was the face that unsettled me most, hollow, expressionless, with eyes too large and dark, staring at me without blinking. I swallowed hard, my pulse thundering in my ears. My first thought was that it had to be a mannequin, a forgotten prop left behind when the zoo was abandoned. But as I took another step forward, the figure shifted ever so slightly. A slow, deliberate tilt of its head, the barest movement, yet enough to send a jolt of fear through me. It was alive. The silence pressed in around me, thick and suffocating, My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move. The figure's gaze held me in place, locking me in an unspoken challenge. Its chest rose and fell in slow, shallow breaths, almost imperceptible. Whatever it was, it had been waiting, and now it had found me. A soft scraping sound broke the silence as the figure dragged its fingers along the bars. The metal groaned under its touch, the sound echoing in the emptiness around us. The motion was slow, deliberate, like a predator toying with its prey. My breath came in quick, uneven gasps as I forced myself to take a step back. The figure reacted instantly. Its hands tightened around the bars, fingers digging into the rusted metal with unnatural strength. A low creak filled the air as the bars bent slightly inward, as if straining to contain whatever was inside. My stomach twisted with a sick realization the cage wasn't meant to keep me out. It was meant to keep it in. I stumbled back, my legs unsteady beneath me. The figure pressed closer against the bars, its breath shallow and ragged. A sound, soft at first, then growing, rose from its throat. Not a growl, not a whisper, but something in between, a noise that sent icy dread through my veins. It wasn't human. It had never been human. Panic surged through me, snapping me from my paralysis. I turned and ran, my footsteps pounding against the cracked pavement. The rustling trees seemed to close in around me, their branches clawing at my arms as I pushed forward. Behind me, the sound of bending metal rang through the air, followed by something worse, the dull thud of something heavy stepping onto the ground. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The pathways twisted and turned, the overgrown foliage making it harder to see. My chest burned with each breath, but I forced myself to keep moving. The feeling of being watched was stronger now, the presence no longer confined to the cage. It was following me. The entrance was close, I could see the broken gates in the distance. Hope surged through me, but it was short-lived. A rustling ahead made me skid to a stop. My pulse hammered as I realized I wasn't alone. The shadows shifted, a figure emerging from the darkness. Not the same one from the cage, but something similar. Something just as wrong. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, its head tilting in that slow, deliberate motion. Behind me, I heard another step, then another. I was surrounded. My breath hitched, my mind racing for a way out. My only option was to run through them, to break past before they could react. Gathering every ounce of strength, I lunged forward. The figure in front of me twitched but didn't move fast enough. I shoved past, my shoulder colliding with its thin frame, feeling its cold, papery skin against my arm. I didn't stop to see if it followed. I just ran. The gates were right there, the path stretching open before me. My lungs burned, my legs screaming with exhaustion, but I didn't slow down. I threw myself past the rusted gates, stumbling onto the dirt road beyond. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air shifted. The pressure that had weighed on me since entering the zoo lifted instantly. I turned, expecting to see them just behind me, but there was nothing. The zoo stood silent, its twisted pathways empty once more. The figures were gone, as if they had never been there at all. The only sign that anything had happened was the deep claw marks left in the metal bars of the broken cage. I didn't stay to question it. I kept moving, not stopping until the zoo was miles behind me. Even then, the feeling of their eyes never left. They had seen me. They had followed. And somehow I knew they were still watching. Story 29. The abandoned school loomed before me, its windows shattered and its walls stained with years of neglect. Ivy crawled up the brick facade, twisting through the cracks like veins feeding the lifeless structure. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and mildew, the kind of smell that lingered in places left to rot. As I stepped inside, the floor groaned beneath my weight, protesting my presence. Desks lay overturned in the classrooms, their wooden surfaces scratched and covered in dust. Torn posters clung to the walls, their faded words barely legible beneath layers of grime. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on me as if the school itself was aware of my intrusion. My footsteps echoed down the empty hallway, disturbing the stillness that had settled here for decades. Rows of rusted lockers lined the corridor, their doors dented and covered in graffiti. Some hung open, revealing forgotten textbooks and crumpled papers inside. As I walked past, a particular locker caught my attention. Unlike the others, it was pristine, no rust, no graffiti, just an unmarked steel door standing slightly ajar. A strange sensation settled in my chest as I reached for the handle. My fingers hesitated, a cold shiver running down my spine. The air around me seemed heavier, as if the school itself was holding its breath. Ignoring the unease curling in my gut, I pulled the locker open. Inside, there was only a single envelope resting on the empty shelf. The paper was yellowed with age, but the ink was bold, untouched by time. My name was written on the front in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. My throat tightened as I picked it up, my pulse quickening with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The envelope felt unnaturally warm in my hands, as if someone had just placed it there. My fingers trembled slightly as I slid my nail beneath the seal and carefully pulled out the letter inside. The moment my eyes landed on the words, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just any letter, it was personal, deeply personal. Every sentence mirrored thoughts I had never spoken aloud, fears I had never shared with anyone. The writer knew things about me that no one should have known. The ink curled into my name at the bottom of the page, but it wasn't my handwriting. It was someone else's, someone who knew me too well. A chill wrapped around my spine as I reread the letter, my mind struggling to make sense of it. The words described my thoughts in perfect detail, as if they had been plucked straight from my mind. The memories, the regrets, the secrets I had never told a soul, yet here they were, written in someone else's hand. A soft creak echoed down the hallway, breaking my trance. I jerked my head up, my breath hitching. The air had shifted, the temperature dropping noticeably. The school, once simply abandoned, now felt inhabited, watched. I stuffed the letter back into the envelope and shoved it into my pocket, my pulse hammering. The sound of something metallic scraping against the floor sent ice through my veins. It was distant, coming from deeper within the school, but it was moving slowly, deliberately. I turned toward the noise, my feet refusing to step forward. A part of me wanted to run, but the other part, the foolishly curious part, kept me rooted in place. The hallway stretched before me, lined with doors that led to forgotten classrooms. A flickering light at the far end cast long shadows across the walls, twisting them into strange, distorted shapes. I forced myself to take a step forward, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The sound of dragging metal grew louder, closer. I passed by a classroom with an open door, the faint scent of chalk and decay seeping from within. The blackboard was covered in faded writing, the words barely visible beneath layers of dust. Desks were scattered in disarray, as if the students had fled in a hurry. Something about the room felt wrong, and I hurried past without looking back. The noise stopped abruptly, plunging the hallway into an unbearable silence. I swallowed hard, glancing around, but nothing had changed. My fingers brushed against the letter in my pocket, the paper warm against my skin. The words echoed in my mind, unsettling and impossibly accurate. A soft whisper brushed against my ear, so close that I felt the breath of it. I spun around, but there was no one there. My skin prickled as I stepped backward, my mind screaming at me to leave. But before I could move, the lockers down the hall began to rattle, shaking violently as if something was trying to escape from inside them. The sound grew louder, a metallic cacophony that drowned out my thoughts. The locker doors swung open one by one, slamming against the walls with a deafening crash. Papers spilled onto the floor, fluttering like ghostly remnants of the past. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stood frozen in place. The hallway was still again, but the oppressive feeling remained, thick and suffocating. I glanced at the open locker where I had found the letter. It was empty now, as if nothing had ever been inside. A cold gust of air swept past me, carrying the faintest sound of laughter. It was distant, almost playful, but something about it made my blood turn to ice. I took a shaky step backward, my body finally obeying the instinct to flee. I turned and sprinted toward the exit, my footsteps echoing in the hollow space behind me. As I reached the doorway, I risked one last glance over my shoulder. The hallway stretched out in eerie silence, the lockers still and untouched. But at the very end of the corridor, barely visible in the dim light, a figure stood watching me. I didn't wait to see if it moved. I burst through the doors and into the night, my breath burning in my lungs. The school loomed behind me, dark and waiting, as if it knew I would return. I wasn't sure why, but I had the sinking feeling that I hadn't left the letter behind. The letter had left something in me. Story 30. The hotel loomed before me, its grand facade now crumbling under years of neglect. Ivy curled around the pillars and shattered windows gaped like empty eyes. The revolving door hung slightly ajar, swaying with the wind, creaking with each slow movement. A faded sign above the entrance bore the hotel's name, though time and decay had rendered it almost unreadable. I stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of dust and mildew. The grand lobby stretched before me, frozen in time, its chandeliers coated in grime. A long-forgotten reception desk stood against the far wall, its wood warped and splintered. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made every step sound too loud, as if the building itself was listening. A thick layer of dust coated the floor, disturbed only by faint trails leading in different directions. The furniture remained untouched, chairs positioned as if waiting for guests who would never return. Torn paintings clung to the walls, their subjects barely visible beneath streaks of grime. The atmosphere felt heavy, as though the hotel still held onto something unseen. Behind the reception desk, an old guest book lay open, its pages yellowed with age. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, flipping through the brittle pages. Names were scrawled in faded ink, their dates spanning decades. Then, on the most recent page, fresh ink glistened under the dim light. "They're still here." The words sent a chill through me, stark against the aged pages. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scanned the room, expecting movement in the shadows. The ink looked fresh, as if the writer had just left or was still nearby. The thought made my skin crawl, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. A sudden noise echoed from the hallway behind me, the faint creak of a floorboard under unseen weight. I spun around, my pulse racing as I searched for the source. The corridor stretched into darkness, lined with doorways leading to long abandoned rooms. The oppressive silence returned, thick and suffocating. I turned back to the guest book, running my fingers over the ink. It smudged slightly, confirming what I already knew. It hadn't been there long. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Someone had written this warning recently, and whoever they were, they had either left in a hurry or they never left at all. A cold draft curled through the lobby, carrying the faint scent of something decayed. I backed away from the desk, my instincts screaming at me to leave. Yet something about the message held me in place, urging me to understand its meaning. The air shifted, and in the periphery of my vision, I swore I saw movement. The chandeliers above me swayed, their rusted chains creaking softly. A slow, rhythmic tapping echoed through the hallway, steady and deliberate. My breath hitched as I turned toward the sound, my body tense. The tapping continued, like footsteps pacing just beyond sight. I forced myself forward, stepping toward the hallway despite every warning in my head. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls seemed to close in. Faint whispers drifted through the corridor, too soft to make out, yet undeniably there. My skin prickled as I passed the first doorway, the darkness inside swallowing what little light remained. A set of stairs led to the upper floors, their once luxurious carpet now faded and torn. Something about them felt wrong, as if climbing them would take me somewhere I couldn't return from. Yet, a part of me needed to see what lay beyond. My grip tightened around the banister as I took the first step, the wood groaning under my weight. Each step felt heavier, the whispers growing louder. The second floor hallway stretched before me, lined with doors left ajar. Some rooms were empty, their furniture covered in white sheets that billowed slightly, though no breeze reached me. Others held remnants of the past, forgotten suitcases, broken mirrors, shoes left where their owners had once stood. A single door at the end of the hall was closed, its frame pristine compared to the others. My heartbeat quickened as I approached, the feeling of being watched stronger than ever. My hand hesitated over the doorknob, the cold metal stinging my skin. A deep breath steadied me, and I pushed the door open. The room was untouched by time. The bed was made, the curtains drawn, and a single lamp cast a dim glow. In the center of the room, another guest book lay open on a small table. I stepped closer, my breath hitching as I read the single line written inside. "You should not be here." The door behind me slammed shut, sending a shockwave of fear through me. The lamp flickered, the light struggling against the encroaching darkness. My chest tightened as I turned, reaching for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, closer this time, circling the room. A shadow moved in the corner, a shape shifting within the dim light. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed against the door, my fingers fumbling for any way out. The whispers grew into a chorus, voices overlapping, a desperate warning or a sinister lure I couldn't tell. The air turned ice cold, my vision blurring as the shadows stretched toward me. A single word formed among the whispers, repeated again and again. "Stay." The sound clawed at my mind, an unnatural echo that burrowed deep. My hands trembled as I pounded on the door, my own voice lost beneath the rising cacophony. With a final, desperate shove, the door gave way, sending me stumbling into the hallway. The whispers stopped instantly, the silence slamming down like a heavy weight. My breath came in gasps as I turned back, but the room was empty once more. The guest book remained on the table, its warning burned into my memory. I bolted down the stairs, my feet barely touching the ground as I raced for the exit. The lobby was unchanged, as if none of it had happened. The guest book behind the desk remained open, the ink still glistening in the dim light. My hands trembled as I pushed through the revolving door, the night air hitting me like a wave. The hotel stood silent behind me, its presence heavy against the night sky. I didn't look back as I stepped away, my mind screaming for distance. The whispers had faded, but I could still feel unseen eyes lingering on me. The last entry in the guest book burned in my mind, a warning I would never forget. "They're still here,"